Ready, Set, Fire with round 2 with Jeff Gonzales. Last time we didn't get enough time to talk through some of the more business-centric aspects of how I see his lessons. I was lucky enough that without much prompting, Jeff actually did what I'd hoped he would. He took some of the business lessons and he discussed how they applied in the Navy SEAL ethos. I really love this episode because it allowed us to stretch our legs a little bit and dig deep into what SEAL culture is really like. With that, enjoy round 2 with Jeff Gonzales. Hello and welcome to the Arsenic Show. Today we have, again, for the second time in just a month or so, Jeff Gonzales.
Yeah.
It's been about a month,
A little bit over.
A little bit over?
A little bit over.
First of all, happy Halloween.
Thank you. Thank you.
Doing anything late tonight?
Going to sleep.
Okay. Yeah, this year, we didn't get our stuff together in time to do anything creative.
Yeah, I had a pretty busy month. The fall time is really busy for us because the government contracts kind of kick in at the end of fiscal year spending and whatnot. So It's been a little cray-cray. Gotcha.
Well, last time we left it off in kind of a weird spot because I felt like we got about halfway through the questions.
Oh, wow.
So that's not great. I'd like to get through at least the questions we have, right?
Okay.
So we'll get to that in a second. But one of the things I had just, you told me about your book.
Yes.
And so I had an opportunity to sit down and actually read this.
Fantastic.
I went through it all yesterday, got through it all.
Wow.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty quick read.
That's pretty impressive to get it done that quickly.
Yeah, it was a quick read, actually.
Good. I like hearing that.
We were cuddled up on the couch, and I just took the day just to power through it.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was good. So I had a couple questions that I think would be useful. So for instance, we hear our esteemed president talking about things like all you have to do is have a double-barreled shotgun.
Can I stop you right there and just tell you anything that he says is absolutely ludicrous? But continue with your question. Go ahead.
Well, you go out on your porch and just blast off a couple rounds.
Sure.
And the bad guys will just start running.
Well, how did that work for you?
Well, I did not blast off rounds inside my house.
No. Or outside your house either.
Or outside my house. Well, first of all, he's talking about a double-barreled shotgun, and
Sure.
I had a pump shotgun. So in my case, I don't know what it was. I've manipulated that gun probably 100 times.
Sure.
But it turns out when you're cold and stressed, and you pull in the slide like as hard as a human can pull it, you can't really manipulate that little button on the bottom that releases it.
Yeah.
And so I knew what I was doing wrong, even in the moment.
Wow.
I couldn't relax to press the button I just couldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what was going on. I'm like, it was so bad. I just had to switch to my pistol.
Sure.
So I wouldn't recommend that situation. And then also from my perspective, having dealt with the weird corner and going around a corner with something that long
For sure.
seemed bad. And I had to have 2 hands on it, which is also bad because I couldn't manipulate doors. And, it seemed like the wrong weapon for the situation.
So you have hit on the dichotomy of shoulder-fired weapons versus handheld weapons. So there's a lot of different opinions on this, and I think you actually illustrated some of the huge cons that exist for a shoulder-fired weapon. We're talking either a shotgun or a rifle of some sort. The advantages obviously are increased lethality. In the case of a rifle, increased capacity, increased accuracy, increased range. In the case of a shotgun, there are some of those capabilities that are met, but they come at a huge cost, and that is the size and the weight and the maneuverability in tight spaces in particular. So when we define home defense, I'm all for a home defense shoulder-fired weapon, whatever that might be for you. But I look at them as more of a strong point, last stand Alamo kind of scenario. So we're not going anywhere. I'm beated up on that doorway, and whoever comes through that doorway is getting the full 9 yards. If I have to move through my home or any kind of structure, I'm far better off with a handgun that allows me to operate it with one hand. And use my free hand for all sorts of other tasks that you discovered. I also have a much more compact and more maneuverable weapon system And in this day and age, capacity is kind of, it's not on par with a 30-round magazine, but 21 rounds plus one in the chamber is a pretty decent response for a grab-and-go format. So, I think a lot of it depends on if you have children in your home and they are located in different wings or different levels of your home, then that you're going to have to move to them and strong point there. So, trying to move with a shoulder-fired weapon is tough. Now, you get there, and all of a sudden you realize, okay, we can't stay here. We have to move together as a unit, trying to maneuver and control scared, sometimes helpless humans is a lot easier when you can use one free hand to do that. So, being of the frame of mind that home defense is it's not limited, but it also there are some boundaries that we have to work with. I have my literal physical boundaries, right? So I have the knowledge of my layout, my home base, my home turf, if you will. So I can kind of predict the terms of the engagement to a certain extent. But if I have to move to my family, then I have to be able to do that in a quick, efficient, and safe manner, because the last thing I want to do is get into a gun grab, gun takeaway with a long arm. And what people don't realize is that if you find yourself within arm's reach, and you got to put yourself in a perspective of homes, add furniture, add blind spots, add dead zones, and you can have people anywhere, not necessarily hiding, but just out of your view. And all of a sudden you round that corner, and now you're looking at another human. Their natural instinct when they see a firearm or a weapon of some sort pointed at them within arm's reach is to reach out and grab it. If they grab a shoulder-fired weapon at the muzzle end, they have complete leverage over you. You're not, there's very few humans on the face of this planet that can actually overpower that leverage. Very few. The idea that, I'll just shoot them off my barrel. Okay, well, that becomes a little bit more problematic. I'm not saying it's not legally justified, but are they in the field of fire where a round fired is actually going to be effective? And then once you do fire, what then? And especially if you miss or you don't get the stop that you're looking for, you're back to square one of having to deal with somebody holding on to that firearm and for all practical purposes, negating its effectiveness across the board. It's no longer a tool. It's still a tool, but it's no longer a tool that favors you.
Right. So what about going out in your front yard and start blasting off some rounds? What do you feel about that?
Well,
that sound advice there.
Presidential advice. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to hold any punches. The guy's an idiot. First and foremost, that's just one thing. What scares me is the fact that that's in my lane, and to hear that type of advice given and realize how absolutely absurd that advice is makes me worried about all the other things that he says that are not in my lane. That I can just make a correlation. Okay, if he's this stupid here, he's probably that stupid in all these other places as well.
So why is it stupid to go out and just start
first and foremost
firing rounds?
you have to be able to justify the use of deadly force. There's no such thing as a warning shot. There's only one legal means to fire a warning shot, and there's only one entity that actually can do it. That's it. The Coast Guard is the only organization that is legally entitled to fire warning shots. No other law enforcement agency and private citizen is actually legally able to fire a warning shot, because that's a deadly force instrument, and you just applied deadly force. There's no question about it. Now, if the idea of shooting in the air to scare somebody away with a deadly force weapon sounds like good advice, there's bigger problems that we have to deal with, right? That should come as no surprise that those projectiles that go up are going to come down, right? And in other places that we've been to, you see a lot of celebration at certain times, and the amount of people that have actually been killed by the returning projectile in other cities or in other areas is scary. It's actually pretty dangerous, and it's actually a lot more common in those areas. I mean, it's sad to see that. So you've got that. The fact of the matter is you've also done nothing. The idea that you're going to scare away an intended violent criminal offender is asking a lot, right? There are some criminals that would potentially be startled by that and even second guess what they are doing. And then there are others that are violent to the core, understand violence, know how to be violent better than you, and are not intimidated by that.
And it also seems like then you just used up your 2 rounds. So unless you're carrying extra rounds,
well, there's that too. Yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah, I don't necessarily. You know, again, the absurdity of that kind of claim reaches new limits. The one thing I will tell you, the other thing that I will tell you is, you also have to be content. You also have to contend with what is legal in the city limits. Discharging a firearm in the city limits is also potentially another issue that you have to deal with. Whether you are, because again, you have to be able to justify deadly force. In this case, you weren't able to justify deadly force, because if you were able to justify deadly force, you would have applied deadly force towards the violent criminal actor. Since you didn't, and you just shot it in the air, there was no justification for deadly force. But now you also run into the legal ramifications of discharging a firearm within city limits. And sometimes those city ordinances they're tricky. Sometimes in the case of like an animal that was struck by a vehicle, there are certain exceptions and whatnot. But for the most part, it's pretty cut and dry, right? And so you can't make the claim of self-defense if there wasn't the justification for deadly force. Right. So you just discharged a firearm for shits and giggles. That's basically what it boils down to. And that's how that's how the law would technically look at it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you might be able to maneuver your way out of that in some way, but you're now looking at having to justify your actions in a court of law and defend your actions and actually any other consequences that come as a result of that. Absolutely.
So another thing that you talked about in your book that I thought was pretty interesting, because it's not what you typically think of as firearms training, but it's weapons lights, but also just a light in your pocket.
Yep.
As being a tool for just everyday utility.
Oh my goodness.
Just like there's 100 reasons you might just need a flashlight just randomly.
100%.
But then also, if the bezel is, nice and sharp, or pointy, it actually, or even if it isn't, it's just strong enough, it becomes a fairly effective hand-to-hand weapon.
Absolutely. So let's back up real quick and talk about a handheld flashlight. So, right after 9/11, there was a survey conducted of the first responders, those that survived. And the survey was, knowing now what you know, what would have been an item that you would have wanted to have on you that you did not during that time? And the top 3, started with number 3, was a cell phone. I mean, if you go back to 9/11, the cell phones weren't as popular. They weren't as small and compact and carried as much as they are in today's modern world. I'm not sure that's a good thing, but that is what it is. And then number 2 was a sturdy multi-tool, some sort of like Leatherman or Gerber, but some sort of multi-tool. The number 1 item was a powerful handheld flashlight. All right. So handheld flashlights are so tremendously valuable. And in today's world, the output that they produce is insane. I'm not going to go so far as to say it's as blinding as the sun, but if you're in a low light environment and I bring my flashlight up into your eye line and I give you a solid blast from that powerful light, your natural reaction is predictable, because the eyes are one of the most sensitive organs that we have. They're right on the surface. They're easily damaged. The brain knows how to protect and take care of them. So the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to close your eyes. So you lose
and probably put your hands up.
Well, that is not. It's not always a given that you'll do that, but the one thing that is a certainty is the fact that you'll close your eyes. Very few people in an unplanned event can keep their eyes open with a very powerful flashlight flashed inside of their face. Very few people. If you know it's coming, you can kind of like, but if you don't know and it's a surprise, which is technically what a lot of these, it's a counter ambush type technique. That white light in your face is going to elicit the response I'm looking for, which is to shut your eyes. As soon as your eyes are closed, your visual reference of where I am and what I'm doing is gone. And as you said, the second thing is what's going to happen is not only are you going to close your eyes, but you're going to move your head off that line. You're going to try to get your face away from the beam of light, right? So that's the second thing. The third thing is that you may bring your hands up to shield you from that light, right? So that's good, because if you bring your hands up, not only are you bringing your hands up, but I'm able to visually inspect and identify what you have in your hand. You might have a weapon, you might not have a weapon. And in which case, hey, the worst case that happens if I splash you with a big, powerful flashlight is I say, hey, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. I didn't know, you snuck up on me, you startled me, whatever. I don't feel bad about that. The best case is that, okay, I see that he has a gun, a knife, some sort of weapon that he's holding, and it's not rendered useless, but there's a delay in the ability to use it. The other thing is that once that reaction occurs, as we all know, the way that our eyes work is for them to readapt to low light, to be able to see again in that lighting condition takes time. It doesn't come back to us as quickly as blinking. So what ends up happening is that I buy myself not just the immediate response, but a few extra seconds as you try to reorient and reorganize to what's happening. Mm-hmm. So hugely valuable in that sense. Not to mention the everyday usage that you're going to find. When people start putting and they make them now, some of these are just, they're small enough that they can fit on a keychain, key ring, and the use that they get is ridiculous. I usually, any family members that haven't gotten one of those from me for a Christmas gift usually gets one. Mm-hmm. And I have I'm like, hey, who doesn't have one yet? And that's my first go-to for just about every family member, extended family member.
Sure.
All my own family members already have one. And the little keychain thing. And I tell you what happens is that they think, oh, it's a nice gift. And they eventually, they put it on their keychain. And then before you know it, they're using it for everything. Mm-hmm. Everything. Well, maybe not everything, but a lot. Yeah. So, you have a lot of advantages in using a powerful handheld light. The fact is, it's not a deadly force tool. In fact, it's the only thing that I could actually carry on to Air Force One. Flashlight. I couldn't even bring my phone on there, but I can bring my flashlight. And when you talk about it as an impact weapon, it's a much better impact weapon than your soft fists. Even rolled up, closed fists are not nearly as durable and rugged as a hardened object like a flashlight. I was just talking to my son. I have fused bones right here from punching somebody on target years and years and years and years ago. It's never healed quite well. And that's my shooting hand on top of it, which was another thing I learned. Don't hit anybody with your shooting hand, and especially don't hit anybody with a closed fist on target with a shooting hand. So then, being able to use that as an improvised impact weapon is hugely valuable. I can walk around with that in my hand in broad daylight, and it's benign. Nobody's going to give a second thought to it, but I can immediately deliver very devastating blows quickly. And I've personally hit people with rifles, with pistols, and with flashlights numerous times, and have elicited the response that I wanted, which is either a diversion away from what they were doing or an immediate cessation to whatever hostilities they were doing. So it's a game changer in that sense. I'm not saying it's going to solve all problems, but when properly applied, it's an incredibly powerful tool that it should be part of not only an everyday carry tool set, but just life in general, as far as like being a prepared person for all sorts of. There was one time I was in a hotel in North Carolina during a hurricane, and the power was out, and the emergency lights, which run on batteries, eventually died. And I was the only one in that hotel that had a flashlight. And we had to take turns at guiding people out, because once you're inside like the heart of a building, there's absolutely no ambient light in there, and it gets pitch black. And I had to escort myself and my roommate. We would escort people out to get to the light so that they can go do their business and whatever and whatnot, and then guide everybody back in. I mean, it was incredible. I was surprised that nobody else, even the hotel staff, didn't have flashlights.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So one other thing about flashlights, a lot of people will talk about weapon-mounted lights, but the utility of that is significantly less, because now you have to pull out a gun and point it at somebody to use it for potentially totally benign reasons, like, helping someone with their shopping cart or whatever. You're pulling out a gun and pointing at it.
So you have to go back. So that's another. First of all, we laugh at that, but there was a video, and I'm not kidding, of a uniformed officer, I don't know what department, directing traffic with his weapon-mounted light on his weapon. It was a traffic intersection, lights.
You can take those things off.
You can, but sometimes not easily.
Oh, really? Okay.
And some of them are like a little bit more. They require either a tool or a device that's going to allow you to do that. But some are quick release. But he literally is directing traffic with presumably a loaded firearm in his hand, using the light as how sometimes they'll use like guided people with those cones on them and whatnot. That's what he was using his for. Instead of using a flashlight with a cone on it, he was using his weapon-mounted light. So it goes back to a maturity of sorts of understanding the situation that you're in. Does this call for deadly force? Because if it doesn't, then you really cannot legally bring that gun out of the holster, even to use the light, right? And if you do, you have just brandished a weapon. So that is also a legal offense. In other words, you just violated somebody else's rights. So you might have started off as a good guy, but by simply brandishing that weapon, you've reversed those cards, and now you are technically the suspect. You are the one that is violating that other person's rights. Like it or not, that's how it works. Even as much as we may not like it, criminals have rights, right? And especially if you haven't been able to identify that person as a actual deadly force threat, they're at best suspect. Most likely they're an unknown. And that unknown means that you have to act accordingly with that. You have to be guarded to some extent, but you can't necessarily just clear leather and just immediately start, yelling and screaming at this guy, show me your hands, show me your hands. I mean, if you do that, you better be ready for whatever follows after that. If you weren't justified in using deadly force there's obviously ways that you can try to articulate that. And people will say, well, I'll just tell police that I was in fear for my life. That is not a good defense to the displaying and potentially use of a deadly force instrument. You really have to be able to get into the weeds and justify, did that suspect demonstrate the means, the intent, and the opportunity to do me great bodily harm, injury, or death? And if they weren't able to do that, if any part of that triangle is broken, then deadly force justification is no longer met. And I don't want to say it's that black and white, but in a court of law, that's what you have to be able to demonstrate: the means, the intent, and the opportunity for you to be able to say that you were justified in using deadly force. And to use deadly, we have to understand, just because I didn't shoot somebody doesn't mean that I had deadly force, because if I break that weapon system out, I now have, and there wasn't a use for deadly force, I have, again, violated that person's rights, and I have done so in an aggravated manner, meaning with a firearm, with a weapon, with a deadly force instrument. Mm-hmm. So it quickly can turn on you faster than you might think. And that's unfortunate, because a lot of people might have good intentions, but they're not well thought out. Or they just really weren't thinking. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I think that happens more than we like. And in today's litigious society, we're seeing prosecutors that are, in my opinion, out of control in things that they, we're looking at countless multiple felons that are continuing to commit felonies, and nothing's being done about it. So that's another problem that I've got. So when we get into the legal system, I don't think it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It's better than most. And in this day and age, I feel like we're really we're not letting justice be served.
Mm-hmm. All right. So there are two things that if someone came up to me and they say, Robert, you have to create some gun legislation, like at gunpoint, you got to do it.
Sure.
And I had to pick something kind of out of the litany of almost always bad ideas.
Sure.
There's only two that I can think of that I would even consider even vaguely good. One of them would be getting training, making sure that anyone who has a firearm at least gets maybe an hour's worth of training, so they're not going to go shoot anybody accidentally. Mm-hmm. Know how to unload the weapon at minimum. Check that it's clear, and know how to maybe not even reload it. Just know how to unload it. just that, let's say. But the other one is, I've heard a number of people say, well, what if we just made it so that everybody had to have a safe? If you're going to own a gun, you have to have a safe. And ideally, whenever you're not in its presence, that it's locked up, or on your person.
Sure.
But so that kids can't get a hold of it,
sure.
Basically. I think both of those things are hovering on relatively good ideas, despite the fact that they would add additional burdens on the firearm owners and so on. But first of all, what do you think about that? And then also I want to get your take on safes in general. Like, what do you think?
So first of all, any legislation that restricts guns in any way, shape, or form is unconstitutional as far as I'm concerned. And there's no positive way that we can swing that. You can try to, basically you're just taking a turd and you're trying to sprinkle some, some party favors on it and make it look good. The Constitution states very clearly, shall not be infringed in any way, shape, or form. So I did caveat that with someone holding a gun to my head. Sure. I get it. And I'm not directing it at you. I'm directing it towards the audience and helping them to understand that there is no good legislation. And if I wanted to pick legislation, if I was forced to do legislation, I would say, all right, everybody the state is going to provide you with your firearm, your ammunition, everything. The state is going to do that. The nation at a national level, whatever, however you want to look at it, that's a law. Yep, we're going to do that. We are going to outfit every citizen that wants one with a firearm, free of charge. Easy day. All right, I'm good with that. That's one. If you want to actually talk about good legislation, let's not sugarcoat it. That's good. Second, if I wanted to really push the envelope, I would say, okay, so if we're going to give you this free gun and this free ammo for life, whatever, you're required to do some training to get it. If you don't do the training, you don't get to keep the gun. Give it back. Or, whatever. There'll be some other alternative there. But that to me is how you really look at good legislation. I just used far-fetched idea, but I threw in the idea of training, right? Because you want there to be some training involved. Okay.
I think it's, the other day, I was maybe a week ago now, I was hanging out with 12 people. And there was only one range safety officer there, and I've taken a conservative amount of training, I would say.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. A lot.
So I was kind of operating as the other RSO, just kind of helping out, making sure people didn't do anything dumb. And I got to tell you, Jeff, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, like everyone there seemed to want to shoot themselves, taking selfies and, here, check this gun out. And like everybody had their finger on the trigger at all times. And, it's just everything bad you can imagine all at once.
Sure.
I think that every one of those people needs training. Like just to know not to have their finger on the trigger, just to know how this is probably loaded.
Sure.
And this case, it always was loaded.
And like I said, the only way that I see that as being a good thing is if we gave them a free gun and ammo for the rest of their life. Then go, by all means, throw the training in there. That's the incentive to get the buy-in.
The carrot and the stick.
Exactly. If we want to do it right, then that's how you do it. And I mean, let's be honest, that has like zero chance of ever going through. Yeah. But if we wanted it, but if we really were serious about actually educating the public, that is the surefire way to actually make that happen. Right? That's a surefire way. I mean, I think of it from this perspective, as we're spitballing here, legislation. What if that were to become the case? Well, you would probably find that there are a fair amount of people that don't want that at all. Great. It's an elective. It's not being forced down your throat. But the caveat is that you've got to put in whatever. You want it to be, 20 hours a year, 16 hours a year, 8 hours a year, 1 hour a year, I don't care, whatever it is, come up with an agreement and make it part of the program. And then you provide the ammo, because that ammo, what that does is that gives you, as you know, the ammunition to actually learn, to train, to actually get to that, because there's only so much that you can do before you actually get to the real learning of actually firing a loaded gun. There's a lot of stuff that we can do, through dry fire manipulations and learning in that aspect, but the real learning doesn't happen until you actually fire your first round.
Right.
So we have to be able to supplement that with the ammunition. So that's an example of good legislation that I actually think has potential. It really could be a game changer in the world, because, I'm not going to even begin to put any kind of restrictions on there, because there shouldn't be any restrictions on there. It is a constitutional right. As long as you are legally able to be in possession of a firearm, which i.e. means that you're not a prohibited possessor, then you're eligible.
You mean like prisoners or whatever?
Right. Prohibited possessor means anybody that has a felony.
Right.
Anybody that has given up that constitutional right because they've committed a crime and been charged and tried and found guilty.
Sure. Okay, what about safes then?
Safes are one of those things where if you want it, you also have to subsidize it, because to make that a requirement that everybody has to have a safe means that there's going to be some people that can't have a safe. I mean, we're talking about, socioeconomics at this point. I mean, to just actually be able to purchase a firearm is a lot for many, many, many people these days, particularly where we're at economically in this country. So now adding another fiscal or financial responsibility to that means that people are not going to get a gun.
Interesting. I had a similar argument with somebody who was talking about insurance for gun owners, like mandatory insurance. I'm like, well, first of all, I have it because I think it's a good idea.
Sure.
But secondly, if you forced it, you're basically saying only wealthy people can have guns.
Exactly.
Which seems counterproductive.
So that's why I'm saying any sort of legislation is gun control by proxy. Mm-hmm. No question about it, because there's going to be inevitably, you're going to exclude people from that, which is part of the plan behind legislation, is to over time whittle away the base to the point where there's really just a very small, narrow margin. And now the people that really need it are not able to participate or enjoy it, however you want to look at it.
Right. So what about safe selection? I mean, clearly you think safes are a good idea, I would assume, right?
So I don't have any...
Despite getting legislation off the table for
sure. Yeah. So, here in the state of Texas, you are required to, if there are minors in the household, deny access to those minors or anybody that is anybody that shouldn't be in possession, that, stranger or worker or visitor, whatever. Mm-hmm. So you have to have that. You have to be able to secure that. How that gets secured, there's some latitude. One way of doing that is a lockbox or a safe or a gun locker. That's one way. Another way is through, barrel locks, trigger locks. Another way could be by keeping it on your body at all times. So I think, what is the purpose behind that? Are you trying to deny access to certain people? In which case, okay, let's address that. And then what's the best way to solve that problem? It may be a gun vault, a gun safe, a gun locker. It may be, maybe not, maybe something a little less intrusive or a little less expensive. And, as a last resort, keeping it on your body is one of the safest ways to control and deny access to the firearm. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have a collection of firearms, then yes, you are probably obligated. But that's a whole different story, because at that point, we're not trying, it's not a hard sell. We're talking about for a new gun owner or somebody that's new to the concealed carry market. And I do not advocate for anything that's going to put a barrier to that entry that potentially could deny somebody the ability to protect themselves. Mm-hmm. There is a responsibility to protect others around them. And that, again, is one of the other ways that we can try to, address that issue. What is your situation? What is your circumstance? Right? I'm not going to just throw a blanket statement out there. Everybody has to have a safe. I would then subsidize that. You want a safe? Here's a free safe. Done. Because now, trigger locks are mandatory in every gun that's sold. That's a federal legislation that came out, I can't remember how many years ago. So technically, there's no need for safes, because those things are part of every gun sale that goes out. Right. The problem that I have with that is that it does not allow you to keep a firearm ready, right? Because in order to use that, you have to lace it through the barrel and out the ejection port and lock it. So it's not usable in any time-restricted manner. So, there could be an argument made that, okay, well, if we're going to mandate that this be a requirement, then the government needs to support that and supply that. This is not a privilege we're talking about. This is a constitutional right, and any infringement on that should be off the table. Shouldn't be even discussed. I don't discuss those in a manner that promotes more legislation or more restriction on your own rights.
Yeah, sure. So if you were to tell, randomly, one of my friends' first time ever shooting was just a couple of weeks ago, and the very first thing I told him is like, well, you got a kid in the house. You're probably going to want some sort of way to lock it up, some sort of safe or whatever. And he's like, oh yeah, I didn't really thought about that. So then, becomes gun selection alongside safe selection, it's sort of two conversations in parallel. Yeah. Do you have any sort of guidance for new owners? Or?
Well, there's a couple of things. If you are looking at it really depends on what the intention is. Like if you're trying to maintain a ready state that is quickly accessible, there's a lot of newer products that are out there. Some of these products are biometric accessible. Some of them are also set up with Bluetooth engagements that I can tap a button and open it from afar. Like I can be, if my loved ones need access to it, they can text me, call me, and I can just pop it open for them. Mm-hmm. There are some traditional kind of like keyed, like physical keys. And the problem with the physical key is that you have to have access to it. You have to be able to get to it. And then you have to be able to find that hole under stress in the dark, probably knowing that you're behind the power curve, because again, you're reacting to something, a home invasion, an intruder, whatever the case might be. So a lot of it will be dependent on your state of readiness and how you feel, what addresses your comfort level, right? So if you have, and if we're talking about somebody that has a collection of firearms, then that it's a moot point. They've already come up with a solution to address that. So we're really again back to the new gun owner,
new shooters, yeah.
And so, like, if you're really in a pickle and cost is an issue, just about every handgun comes in a hard-sided case. That hard-sided case is it's approved for travel through TSA. So you can technically take that and turn that into a improvised gun safe for your home by using either cable locks or a lock itself or some sort of secured device. So, if you are in a pickle, that is one option that sometimes people overlook. I mean, back in the day, it was a terrible idea, but it was brilliant yet terrible. Glock, when they first came out, the way they got their nickname, Tactical Tupperware, was because they came in a small little black bin that had that pliable lid on top of it. And the gun sat in the middle, and the trigger guard sat over a small post that was hollowed out. And if you went into like the armory, basically all those guns sat on a rod that from the ceiling to the floor was filled, and then there was a lock on the very top, so they couldn't get pulled out. That was how they secured them back in the day in the vaults. Even departments would do that. Of course, putting a loaded weapon in that condition is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
And as you can see by the current storage or box that they come in, they've done away with it. But you can look online, you can see some of those old school tactical Tupperware bins that they used to come in. I think I might even have one or two still left from some of the early guns that I actually had back in the day. So, that's not necessarily a good idea, but gun cases in today's world, that the manufacturer gun cases, are actually not a bad option.
Well, thank you for that. So for those who want to get into firearms for home defense in particular, or personal defense, it's a great book.
Well, I appreciate that. We that's designed as a tooth to tail treatise for particularly the new concealed carrier. It is great for a new gun owner that potentially is interested in carrying, but if you've already made the decision to carry, most of the state material that's provided to you is, again, it's wanting in many ways. And so this is a way to actually fill in a lot of those gaps and give you an actual working knowledge of how to do it. Like literally, as you've kind of not the best subject for this because you have a lot of guilty knowledge. You've been around it for
that's
a while.
why I think it was such an easy read for me.
Oh, probably.
Like, okay,
absolutely. Yeah, like, oh, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. But for somebody that's not, it was designed to provide them with enough information for them to be able to actually carry a firearm in public comfortably and answer a lot of questions about how to do that.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So let's pivot now.
Okay.
So this is what the second half of what I wanted to talk to you about.
Shit.
Which was more about you have all these kind of things you say in context of guns. This like a well-worn wisdom. It's just,
Thank you.
It's just like, and usually it'll take me days or maybe even weeks to fully process not just like what was happening in the room at the time that we're having training, but like how it applies generally, as opposed to specifically to that very, rote thing that we were doing. And so I think I talked a little bit about when I was taking defensive pistol 2 requalification.
Okay.
Is when this happened. And I felt like I could do this no problem. Like this should be very easy for me. And in practice, great. I actually went to go do it in front of you, and I was miserable, absolutely just terrible. And I'm like, what is going on? Yeah. So then, I don't know, a couple weeks later, after I'd done a bunch more tests and training and trying to figure out what's going wrong, I'm like, I saw you behind the back of the range, that hallway back there.
Yeah.
And you're kind of passing by, and you're like, oh, how are you going to do in that test? You're going to pass it, right? And you're walking away. You weren't even looking at me. And I'm like, no, I have no idea. Like, I cannot, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. It's super weird. Like when I test myself, I'm fine. When I get in front of you, I'm terrible. Like what? I can't diagnose it. There's nothing I'm doing wrong in the moment. You know what I mean? And you stopped. You still weren't looking at me. You turned slightly, and you're like, Robert, just focus on the shot you're making. Yeah. And then you followed it up with, you're probably having anticipation because you missed one, you shanked one round. And
sure.
And now you're screwing up, and now it's in your head, and you're continuing to fail.
Yep.
Which is a very common shooter error.
Yeah.
It worked. I just stopped thinking about whatever I just did. And I just focused on this specific round. Like, that one went wide. Who cares? Next one.
Yes. Yeah.
Like I know I yanked it, or I know I dipped forward slightly. Sure. But whatever. Fine. Just keep going. Like, ignore it.
That's a great observation that you have of yourself, first of all.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
But I think it has a lot of utility when we're talking about business. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you about, is like the business aspect of all of this stuff. And so I've had a couple of spectacular business failures.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Really bad. I mean, some were more my fault than others, but if you're going to do extreme ownership, they're all exactly totally my fault.
Gotcha,
you know what I mean?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Like I'm sure like one of them was subprime mortgage crisis related. Like, I was kind of caught up in a wave of, I had a bunch of financial clients. I'm not going to survive that because they're out of business. So they're my clients. So I'm out of business.
Yep.
But before that, I had another kind of catastrophic thing happen where I was working at realtor.com, and we had this really crazy new mapping software we're building, and we'd spent all this time, and we were like ready to go. And then management came in and said, no. We just do, like, we had worked on this thing for like 6 months. And I'm like, geez, what are you talking about? No. And like, well, we want to end of life this platform. If we make it too nice, people will want to stick on it. We have this other platform we're building. And so we don't want to make this thing any nicer than it already is.
Gotcha.
And I was just, it was like a stab wound. Like, I cannot believe we spent so much time and effort on this thing and just have it fail, or not even fail. Like,
didn't even get a chance to try it.
Yeah. And so I think it would have felt differently if it had just been like a week's worth of work or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It was my team, and they were, me trying to rally the team around it. And it was kind of for weird political reasons. Like, we could have made this platform good. What I mean? We could have actually made it amazing. I think I got pretty gun shy because I was remembering the shots that I had made before.
Sure.
And so when I went into building one of more recent companies, I was really like, I don't know, just anxious about it. Like, like I've had some bad ones, you know what I mean? And like, I'm a little worried about what's going to happen next. But then these are different businesses. This is a different scenario. I don't have those kinds of people around. I'm not beholden to the financial markets. This is a different kind of business.
Sure.
And I was able to kind of talk myself into ignoring all of these prior shots that I have missed. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so, in retrospect, I think that's a very useful thing. Like, just being very present about what your current conflict, what the current thing you're trying to accomplish is.
So, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's insightful that you can correlate that to something that's outside of that community. It reminds me of, one of the things that the special operations community does very, very well is, we learn from our lessons. I when I say very, very well, I mean, we make mistakes like everybody else. In the past, our lessons learned cycle was measured in like years. Now it's measured in days.
Oh, right.
So yeah, being able to get real time information from the field to the training house to the outgoing units is remarkable. So it's amazing.
Wow. So it actually gets all the way back to the instructors. Like, we saw this failure here on this day.
So fast. I mean, that's what 20 years of war will do for you. You really get fast on that maturation cycle, basically. But one of the things that, every mission is unique. I mean, we could go and hit the exact same house, a month later. Bad guys are back in the same place. And the mistake that we make is thinking that it's going to be the same, that everything's going to follow the same path that it did the first time that we did it. And the mistake is not being able to read the terrain and act accordingly. Like, we have all these tools available to us, all these tools, tactics, equipment, the team unison, the mission, all of these things working for us. And when we get on target, you let the situation develop. We have this saying, let the situation dictate what you're going to do. You have the tools, right? Because you've been trained, you've worked together as a team, you've developed a symphony, if you will, of action on target. And so rather than try to restrict that, let's only do it like this. Our command structure is such that the tip of the spear are the actual shot callers. They're the ones making the commands. They're the ones that are making the decisions real time. I mean, these are, this is huge type stuff. And the reason why it's successful is because we're able to adapt very quickly to that battle space. So I might know the layout that it had a month ago. It would be very amateur of me to think that's the layout currently, because I understand my enemy and I understand that they're more clever than I would like them to be. If they're going to keep doing the same stuff, that same building, they're going to change it up some way, shape, or form. They're going to do something different. And if I put all my eggs in the basket that, I'm going to go through this main door and I'm going to button hook right, and all of a sudden I've planned for that. I hit that door, I button hook right into a wrought iron gate that is now installed there, right? And rather than react to that in real time and take all the years of experience and training and the unity of my team together at one, if I had that plan if I had that idea, I'm going to go right, and now I can't go right, I'm stuck in that paralysis analysis mode, which I think a lot of people in the business world can find themselves in. So being able to adapt very quickly in whatever the battle space is, in this case, it's, boardroom business area. Mine is, a battlefield in a third world country. The key for us is being able to adapt and employ the experience that we have accumulated over all that time together as a team. That's what makes us a force that is difficult to contain. So when you're thinking about the last shot, it has value because there was lessons learned from that, but it can't be the way you approach everything, because then all you've done is you've created a narrow lane of your existence, and that's it. You're going to dominate in this lane, but if anything is outside that lane, it's outside of your, expertise, whatever you want to call it. It's outside of your capabilities. And I don't want to ever say that. I don't like, there are some things that I will say flat out no to. Like if we're looking at a crazy, you're going to swing from this one rig to this other rig, and then you're going to rappel down, and then you got to crawl through I'm going to probably say no to that. That does sound like a little far-fetched, like somebody's been watching too many Mission Impossibles. Mm-hmm. But, I've done some pretty crazy shit to get on target and accomplish the mission. And a lot of the times, man, I'm just like, you're reading what's happening. And you're able to take that information in real time, and you're able to evaluate it based on your experience, because that's the knowledge. All that experience that you have, that's your greatest tool. And then your mind, as far as how quickly you can process what you're seeing in real time, and then select the most. It doesn't have to be a perfect. No, that's the other problem. People want to make a perfect solution. Perfect solution doesn't exist in a bloody battlefield. What we have is we have something that is familiar to us, right? So I might, this room might be similar to the room that I hit that month before, but now, the doorway's on the opposite side. But I can still take that and I can bridge the gap. There's enough familiarity with that I can actually take my experience and then use that experience to fill the gap and then apply the tactic from there. And that's kind of like what you're
100%.
starting to see. You're starting to understand that. It's like, okay, man, the best advice I can give you is well, not you, but the best advice in the situation like that is maintain that adaptable, that evolving, that improvisation. That is so, I cannot tell you how many times I'd look to my left and something different happened. We're so used to having things happen in a very choreographed manner. Back in the day, it was so choreographed. One man goes left, one man goes right, and blah. And now what we're able to do is we're able to take the experience of that individual. He's real time inputting all this information. He sees what's happening. He realizes, okay, the answer is not left. The answer is right. I've got to go right. That's what's in the best interest of the mission. And when we did that, when we made that paramount in all the things that we did, all of a sudden it's just like, watch out. It just redefined our capabilities on the battlefield completely. And there's no reason why you can't take that same mentality and apply it in a business world. The irony right now is that many, many companies are turning to the special operations community for not just leadership, but also understanding of tactics and strategy and how we apply that theory in the battlefield. But how can that be applied in the business world? Because that's like, there's so much that we've learned. And for us, the stakes are pretty damn high. Mm-hmm. Somebody's not coming home basically. And a lot of times that happens. In the business world, obviously the stakes are, that was a failure. That business sucked.
Well, yes, obviously, but depends on the company, right? Some companies are like healthcare.
Oh, sure.
You could actually have people die if you screw up.
That's a good point.
Yep. Or, but just even a run-of-the-mill company, this is livelihoods. These are people's entire livelihoods based on
100%.
Bad decisions at the executive teams.
I couldn't agree with you more. And that is there's nothing to be taken lightly, right? When you are in charge, when you have people's livelihoods, and in this case, the livelihood that we're describing is, the what they're accustomed to. Mm-hmm. In my case, in my former case, the livelihood was whether or not I came back from a mission.
Obviously,
but
hierarchy of needs is higher.
But there's a different. But this is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. There is a parallel that exists, and that's why I believe that more and more businesses in this day and age are able to see that and value that and take that on, because unfortunately we've already cut that trail. We've already cut the trail there for a lot of folks. And if you have the presence of mind to recognize that and take that information and apply it in your business world and business sense, I'm not saying that somebody coming out of a business management school is not capable of making good decisions, not capable of giving you good advice. Not at all. But the experience and the lessons learned in our business, has been evolved to the point where, like I was saying earlier, the lessons that we're learning that used to take years to update take days now.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the absolute. I'm 100% convinced that, along with some other very key points, have saved so many lives. Mm-hmm. Saved so many lives. Just doing that. Just being able to get that feedback loop connected quickly so that when folks are leaving and getting on the ground, they're already one step ahead. Hugely valuable. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another thing that is lacking in the business world, is a very, very timely feedback loop that people actually will value. And what I mean by that is like, well, that's coming from, my floor manager who's 2 levels below me. How, what does he know, or how valuable is that? Well, that's pretty freaking valuable, because he's on, the front lines, if you will. He's seeing everything happening right there. That information is incredibly valuable. And if you're smart, you'll take that and you'll pivot from there.
So this this dovetails into one of the other things I want to talk about, actually.
Apropos is that.
I know, which is when we were doing CQB stuff. It was solo CQB, so a little bit different. But you still like told us what we would have to know had we gone through, team CQB.
Yeah.
Close quarters combat battle, for those who aren't familiar. But anyway, so one of the things you said is the guy in front is always right.
Yeah.
He's always right.
He's always right.
And it's interesting because your instinct is like, but there's a guy over there. I can see him. It's like, well, there probably is a guy there, but there's probably like 5 guys on that side. That's why he's going there. So it's not to say you should ignore that guy, but let him do what he's doing because he has better visibility than you. But it's very similar to you said, the guy in the boiler room or whatever. It's like, what does that guy know? Well, that guy might know everything you need to know about your business.
That's the thing. I think what is it's an unfortunate occurrence, which is, again, we have a bottom up leadership chain, and the business world typically has a top down business chain or leadership chain. And in a world, in the business world that is evolving literally overnight, you're not agile with a top-down leadership structure. By the time you find out, oh gosh, our floor manager said that was a terrible idea and that we shouldn't have done that. We should have done it this way. Weeks, months, maybe even years have passed. And with the competitive market being so competitive, you're at a disadvantage because now you're behind all your competitors.
So a modern thing in business is consensus building. They'll get like 20 people in a room to have this big conversation, and all these
Nobody
opinions.
wants to make a choice.
But even worse than that, they all want to feel heard, despite the fact that there might only be one person who should be heard.
100%.
Yeah, you have the one designer who really understands what the client wants, and you have 20 vice presidents who are all just trying to look smart.
Yeah.
I have a statement that I want to read to you. Oh, this is from eBay. This is their vision statement.
Okay.
The vision statement of eBay is to provide consumers with an intercontinental marketplace through the World Wide Web, allowing almost anyone to trade a host of items easily, with the mechanisms allowing for a host of financial opportunities across the globe.
Damn.
I mean, talk about word soup.
We just sell shit.
I mean, they could have said, we make it easy to find things you love.
I mean,
they could have made a tiny little, much easier to understand.
I mean, that is one of my other problems with the business world is, when we're doing our mission planning, the parts of the mission are delegated to the experts for that particular need. And that's it. And it has no ranking. There's no superior rank trumps everything. It's who's got the superior experience, who's the guy that has the knowledge that's actually going to win the day. And what that allows us to do is that allows us to avoid making mistakes because, and we're not in it for the glory, right? We're in it for the deed, the mission. That's what drives everything. So there's no real, I don't want to say there's no egos because in a special operations community, I mean, you're looking at a boatload of egos. But the difference is that when I can remember, I'm a new guy in a platoon when I first got asked a logistics questions about during mission planning. And I later became I became very well versed in mission planning. It became something I took on very well, or took to very well, because to me that's where the rubber meets the road, right? If we do our job in planning this mission out, and everything can go out the window. And I always say this, that the bad guy has a vote as well. Mm-hmm. But so much is mission planning is so absolutely critical. And I can remember, like I said, the first time that I was asked for my advice, and I'm like, I'm a new guy.
It must have blown you away.
It did. It absolutely did. And I was caught flat-footed, and I was like, and it just so happened to be something that I had, interest in and was good at. And, I gave them my feedback, and, it was something that they took into consideration during the rest of the planning. But it turns out that was, rather than making that a method that we would use, it was deemed, okay, we just don't have that expertise to actually make that happen. And so we didn't. But rather than actually try to do it and find out, oh shit, we can't do this on target or, during the mission, it was one of those things where, oh, okay, well, yeah, we actually really don't have that capability. We have, the rudiments of that capability, but we don't have it enough to put the mission on, hey, if this doesn't work, we're screwed. So it terrified me. It absolutely terrified me because here I am like, but the reason why I bring that up is the importance behind listening and taking information from all the sources, particularly the sources that have that level of expertise. That's what's valuable. So if we had gotten into that room with 16 of those other guys, and if I guarantee you that everybody would have said, yeah, we can do that. We can do that. We absolutely can do that. We'll die trying to do it. And that's another thing. That's another problem that we had in the past was not being strategic about how we approach certain things and not seeing what's in our best interest. Like there are some missions that are just not in our best interest. And even though there's maybe some accolades associated with it, it's maybe not it's not worth it in some cases. But it became a model for me that I would like when I rotated back as a BUDS instructor. One of the things that I really tried to instill in the guys was, do you know your team? Do you know your team well enough to know what their strengths and weaknesses are? And do you know how to pull that information, extrapolate that to be able to use it to your advantage? Like how, as you're doing this mission planning, start to think about that. What does every member of this team have to offer? And how does that help? How does that improve your chance of success? Right. And I hope that was valuable to a lot of the guys. I'm sure, at some point guys start to think back to that. And, you really do have to know your capabilities. You have to know what you can and can't do. And if you can't do it, find another way. I mean, we couldn't do what we wanted to do, and we found another way. And instead of trying to do what we couldn't do and find out, shit, on target, we can't do this. Now we have to, double back and figure out another option for us. We didn't even bother with that. We just went for the backup that became the primary.
So another one is, it was a very, very early on training thing. We were basically talking about the right way to hold a pistol, and you were basically saying that a pistol is a fulcrum. And a fulcrum is not a word that is used that commonly, but it's very descriptive. There's a center, and everything's kind of radiating from that center. The further away you come from the center, basically the more control you have over the thing, the more leverage you've got over it. And this is really mostly about recoil management.
Well, yeah.
But walking back, I really extrapolate pretty heavily from these little things.
I can't wait to hear where this is going.
You would never guess it in a million years. But I was thinking, so businesses, I think of businesses as a human, as an actual human being walking around.
I love that.
They start off as one thing, right? You got a fresh baby, and it's got all this promise, and it's going to be amazing. We've already figured out it's going to be a doctor, right?
Okay, I like that. I like that.
Think of that as sort of the genetic code. That's the DNA that's baked into it, right?
Okay.
It's the operating agreement. It's the, articles of incorporation. It's, shares, who's got 50% of 50%. And right there you have problems. Like what happens? You have conflicts.
For sure.
So that's baked into the DNA. Like there's something flawed right there.
Yeah.
But then as you get a little older, and you kind of like grow and you got a little bit more human stuff going on, you have these epigenetics going on. Like you have these other forces kind of changing with this, promising young lad. And now all of a sudden you have these contracts that are, maybe either customer contracts, or you've got employment contracts that you have to, handle or whatever. Or now you have an insurance document that you have to be compliant to get insurance, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point where you might have had the best intentions to make this thing change the world or whatever, but like now you have to go public. And what happens then? Well, now you're about quarterly earnings. You're not about changing the world, or 100%. Making the world more accessible, or whatever your original operating agreement said you were supposed to do. Now you are totally beholden to short-term profits and making sure your clients are happy, and your
shareholders are happy.
Your employees don't sue you, and making sure that the 8,000 business agreements you signed up to that point are all being held to the point where no one really knows what this thing is anymore. And but if you're good at this, you actually realize every single one of those lines is a fulcrum. They're all way out from the radius. They're super far away from what you originally thought this company was. But every one of them is applying a outsized amount of pressure on what the original intent of the company is. And stuff that's way far away from where you think would matters a lot when you're talking about contracts. You can bankrupt a company very quickly with just one bad clause.
Sure.
And yet they don't get the same attention as the core, right? The core gets a lot of attention. People are like, oh yeah, what's your structure? What's your cap table look like? But it's actually the stuff that's way out in the periphery that matters. And that's that fulcrum.
Yeah.
And so when I look at companies, like hostile takeovers is something I spend a lot of time thinking about because it's a problem that I've had to encounter multiple times in previous organizations. And yeah, more times than you might expect. But each time it's related to one or two clauses, some agreement someone made. Sometimes it's literally the back of a napkin. You know what I mean? Where verbal contracts are a thing, you know what I mean? And so when I think about what you need to think about when you're talking about business, you also have to think about it from the competitor's perspective. And the competitor is not necessarily a full-blown real enterprise competitor. It's also your employees.
Oh, I see.
Your employees also have their own version of that. They have their core, the thing that they're trying to do. They're trying to get money or whatever, but they also want vacation time. They also want, the ability to have dental insurance or whatever. And each one of those clauses are all points of negotiation. They're all additional places where you can apply pressure.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of having to both manage in a positive way, like try to get them on board and make them feel happy, but also get all these negotiation points kind of tamped down.
Yep.
So yeah, this fulcrum concept is made my brain expand a lot into different pressure points you can push way on the periphery. And I imagine in the special operations world, it's very similar. Like you maybe can't get the guy, but you can get like the guy's friend or the guy's friend's friend or whatever. There's all these pressure points all over the place.
There were 2 times that the target that we hit was what we consider to be a person of interest inside that close circle, and it was the reason why we were taking a chance that the HVT, the high value target, would circle up with one of these persons of interest at one point or another. And, we hedged our bets that we would get lucky. I mean, I cannot tell you, there was one time, I'm not shitting you, the cigar was still lit and the ember was still burning in the ashtray. That's how close we came to one of them. So, I mean, I think that's smart that you can do that because there's a lot. I mean, if you think of it like the way I kind of think about the idea that you just shared with us, my initial thought is I have to keep my assets, what I have to work with, I have to keep them in the best possible condition to work. So I incentivize them through, dental plans, vacation time, overtime, things like that. But those also come back to bite me down the road.
Because I had to sign a contract with some dental organization.
And now you're beholden to their, and that's going to also affect the company in some respects. So, it's hard to kind of find that happy medium. But the thing that I have found is that the companies that are the leanest are the most agile. And they're the ones that are able to adapt in their battle space the quickest. So while your company is sitting here in litigation trying to deal with dental, this other company is out there making sales. This other company is out there pushing the boundaries of development, and you are playing catch up. And I hate to say it that way, but that's kind of how I see a lot of what's happening in the business world is that I feel as though, if you took if your team is assembled well and you have the leadership that has given you basically, hey, go and do God's work. This is the direction that you go. They wind you up and they set you loose. And then you have, a structure that supports all of that. It's a winning combination, but it's also not realistic as much as I would like it to be.
So Ryan Holiday has many books out, but one of them was The Obstacle is the Way.
Yeah.
Which I just really like that book dude. A lot.
Yeah, it's a great one.
But it kind of reminds me of what you're talking about here. It's like you might be thinking small and underpowered, or however you might want a derogatory version of that statement. Is somehow bad.
Yeah.
It actually might be your best virtue.
Well, so here's the thing too. I'm sure everybody wants to, at some point be a Starbucks. That started off with a single store, and before you know it, every corner has a Starbucks on it. Mm-hmm. And maybe that ship has sailed. Who's going to be the next Starbucks? Well, I don't really think there's going to be a next Starbucks, but what in that space they're so big that they are thin. And in that space, in that coffee house space, what are they missing that they can't do because they're too big? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where you don't have to think about it from success being, oh, I have to be the next Starbucks. Maybe success is better illustrated by where's the opportunity here that we're not seeing, that we can take advantage of because we're more agile and we can kind of float in between these barriers and actually get to that end point, that whatever it is.
This is exactly back to your old profession, right? Like a standing military is big and clunky and slow, and it leaves a lot of tracks and logistics, and it's impossible to move it quickly.
Yeah.
But you guys can just jump right in and swim out and you're done.
It's true. I mean, there's something to be said about that. And I'm not saying that you at some point you ultimately want to maybe try to replace Starbucks. Maybe that is, but that might not be the goal that you start out with. Mm-hmm. That might be as you continue to capitalize on success, now your environment changes and now your goals change. And now you are like, okay, now we're competing with the big boys. Let's look at it from the next level up, and where is the opportunity for us to take advantage of? It's like the way I look at it is like, yeah, sure, you can go through the front gate. I mean, that's the most heavily armed location. Sure, yeah, that's going to probably lead to a lot of noise and a lot of probably bad things. Or we could just go over the wall on the back side where it's really dark and nobody sees anything. And that leads us into the next phase of our operation. But, as opposed to kind of always thinking that you have to go and tackle the front gate and just storm it and blah, 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 blah. There's possible opportunity for you to do things in an other way that is, I don't want to say unconventional, because it's actually conventional now for us to do that. At a time, throwing somebody over a wall to go and unlock the door to let us in so that we can get our job done, that was like unconventional. But now it's kind of like what we do as an order of business. Mm-hmm. So
another one of the ones you gave me was pointing my elbows down. Oh. I had my elbows a little flared out, and it was causing me to rub the top of the trigger frame. Yeah, and it was causing very, very minor changes in my shot pattern, but it were always left. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, I don't get it. Like, I'm doing everything else right. I just don't understand. Like, my aim point's fine, but like, it's just something. And you told me to point my elbows down. And to me, that means like there's this butterfly effect, right? This tiny little thing that's way over here on my elbow is causing the shot to go wide at 25 yards.
Sure.
And I think there's something about corporate culture that comes to mind when I think of this. So specifically, like, let's say I'm like 15 minutes late to a meeting as a vice president or something. Yeah. It might seem kind of minor, I'm 15 minutes late, whatever.
Yeah.
Didn't tell anybody I was going to be 15 minutes late. I'm just a guy who's 15 minutes late sometimes.
Sure.
And so now everyone's like, I guess this is a culture where we're 15 minutes late sometimes.
Sure.
And without telling anybody, that's just expected course of action. Some people are always going to be late, and that's a thing. And you don't even have to apologize. You just show up. But if that meeting had, like, let's say 10 people in it, that's many hours of human resources just wasted right there.
Yeah.
Just in a single meeting.
Yeah.
And then you have that happen once a day, and now you're talking about this is a systemic thing where you're just it starts kind of percolating through the environment, and I think we don't really have a good handle on what the downstream effects of these tiny little negative things are, but they've got to be enormous.
So second order effects is what we're talking about here, and I couldn't agree with you more. What ends up happening is that second order effects are hard because it almost requires you to have like a crystal ball, right? However, I do think that being able to take a step back and have the ability to see the impact of something like that, like you just said, all right, if I had 10 people in a meeting and I'm 15 minutes late, I just cost the company this many man hours.
Two or more right there.
Yeah, exactly. And if that becomes, so now let's just arbitrarily throw 2. And if every month I've got 5 meetings like that, that's 10 hours. And, you know, every quarter I'm doing that, you're looking at a couple days. And so at a certain point, where do you step in and actually recognize, like that goes back to the feedback loop that we talked about, to being able to have the hindsight to look back and say, wow, this ripple effect that we condoned in the beginning has now cost us this much in productivity, this much in, you know, forward thinking, this much in our, you know, interface with our clients and our sales team. I mean, I say it like this, like that 15 minutes seems insignificant now, right? But down the road, are you willing to take that 15 minutes, multiply it out times the total number of, you know, man hours that you've cost the company, and are you willing to just throw that out the window?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got another example of this, more dramatic.
Oh,
but I think it illustrates the point. So we this is many companies ago now. We had this kind of open office environment. We had like a living room in the middle of it that people could watch TV kind of at night. So there's the first failure, right? We're just letting people kind of come and go as they want and hang out. We kind of wanted to make it more like a club feel, so people can feel free to work late hours and not stress about it. They can crash on the couches that they want. So many failures. I'm sure you're picking it up on it. But then, well, you know, one day we come in, there's like a bunch of cocaine on the table.
Oh, well, okay. I guess they were working hard or hardly working.
And so now you're putting the company in like serious peril. Like, but it was at the time, as very, very, very young executives, we did not really have a good perception of how these things would all kind of go down the, like one thing leading to another.
I think that's asking a lot to have that. Like, again, I go back to what were your intentions. Well, your intentions were to create a cooperative, productive work environment. And, you know, I always ask this question. I mean, what model are you trying to model that actually has shown success, you know, with that type of culture? Is there a successful model to date that actually employs those types of strategies? And if there is, great. But does that model fit your business? And does it fit your actual employees and your customers? Because you're a reflection of your customers. And so if it doesn't, that's problem number one.
Well, I think it just shows like there's this level. So if you're looking at it from the bottom up, it kind of points to corporate malfeasance. Like you're just not taking this seriously, you know? If you're looking at it from top down, you know, it's like, you know, maybe in the military sense, like you're like all your stuff's all fucked up. You don't have the you're not matching. Like this isn't regulation. That's not ironed.
Yeah,
you know? You're a mess.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, and it just shows that you're going to have this systemic problem kind of percolating through. Like it doesn't matter which direction you're looking at.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I remember there was one time we were doing some training, and at the time, what I was like, we had a mandatory at the end of the day clean your guns. It was a mandatory event, and at one point, I questioned why we were doing that. Why are we doing this? And the response was, well, because that's what we've always done. I'm like, well, that's not good enough for me. And I want to know what this gun is capable of doing. I don't want to know that it has to be cleaned at the end of the day. I'm out on a 4 or 5 day reconnaissance mission and I have to clean it at the end of every day. I shoot a little bit. I have to clean it every day, blah, blah, blah. I want to know what is the limit that I'm working with here? How far can I push this gun? I mean, my life and the life of every teammate in this room is depending on this gun to work. But what's its extreme working limits? And it sounded good to me at the time. It sounded like, hey, yeah, I've got good ground to stand on. I want to know this. And never mind the fact that there was numerous tests that were done on that gun. And while I was not privy to those tests, the fact that I'm holding this gun is the fact, demonstrates that it has already made it through all these tests. And I remember my chief kind of got on me the first day. He's like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. I can't remember what he said. And then the second day, and I got to like almost the end of the week. And what bothered me was that I was not in the room with my teammates. Yeah, I found busy work to do. I would go and go break out more pallets of ammo. I would go and, paint steel. I would go and get stuff ready for the next day. I mean, I wasn't just sitting there not doing shit, but I missed the culture of being in the room at the end of the day and cleaning guns. It wasn't about cleaning the gun. It was about
just a bunch of guys bullshitting.
Yeah, it was about being in the room together, talking about the day, what went well, what didn't go well. It was almost like an impromptu debrief, hot wash, kind of, whatever you want to call it, session of sorts. And I didn't understand that. And part of the reason why I didn't understand it was because I was thinking about myself only. Like I want to know. I want to know what this gun's capable of doing. I wanted, blah, 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 blah. And my chief was gracious enough or just, he was entertained by my stupidity. And he let me kind of go a little bit longer than he probably wanted me to go. And I remember when I circled back and I came back into the room, he kind of stopped me. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I want to come back in here and clean my gun. He's like, I don't know.
Was your hat literally in your hand?
I was, and he's like, let's go outside. And so we walked outside. It wasn't as easy as me just walking into the room and start cleaning, and I had to have a talk with him about the culture and what, there are certain things that we do and we do them for a reason. And they work, and there's a reason why they work. And so for me, I had to learn that the hard way. I had to learn that there's a reason why we do certain things. I may not understand or know that reason. That doesn't stop me from actually, pushing the boundaries either. But then I had the fortune of great leadership who let me kind of figure shit out on my own. In this case, what's the worst that can happen? My gun doesn't work on the firing line, and I am a tool. I'm a dirtbag, and there's a significant punishment for shit like that. And so, it was almost as if I had ostracized myself from the team. And so for me to come back into that environment meant that I had to understand what I had compromised to be able, I had to know what I was doing. On the surface, it might've been, hey, I want to see what this gun's capable of doing, but there was something deeper that he knew. And and I'm grateful because what he ended up doing is like, hey, listen, this is something that I'm never going to quell. That's a rebellious streak. And, there's going to be a time and a place where that shit is going to kick ass and we're going to need it. But this wasn't the time. And I'm like, roger that. And, eventually I was welcomed back in and I was able to go about. And after that, it was like, okay, yep, I get it. Done. Totally understand why we do this. And those other days I'm thinking, I'm like, fuck, I'm like, look at what I'm out here. I'm getting ready for the next day. My shit's all together. But here's the thing. As soon as my shit was done, the rest of the team still had to do their shit. And now I'm not doing shit. I'm just standing around waiting for them. Like, let's go, Liberty, let's go. I'm ready to go. They're all getting their shit ready because they just spent that time cleaning their weapons. So it was a really hard lesson for me to learn about culture and the importance behind certain things. It's not a tradition. It's not a part of that. It was a time for us to not be under, because when we're out there in that environment, that CQB environment, we are under extreme pressure and extreme, every move we make is observed, it's documented, it's videotaped, and it's debriefed. So being in that cleaning room at the end of the day is a cathartic process to helping us unwind and process what happened during the day from our own kind of like informal debrief manner. And again, that was something that I'm like too dumb to figure out, at that age in my career. But like I said, I was fortunate to have good leadership that recognized that, for me to learn that, I had to see it. I had to recognize that. And it took me, probably took me longer than it should have for me to figure that shit out. But that's the other asset, liability, however you want to look at it. My stubbornness is something that has both helped and hurt me over many years.
So what do you think about the difference? I'll tell you my opinion first. There's two types of leaders I've generally seen: the wartime CEOs or executives and the peacetime ones.
Oh yeah. And
the wartime ones, I personally prefer generally because they are more, there is a set of things that need to be accomplished. We are doing that and nothing but that. And like all this other distractions go away. And
love that. Yeah.
It's very focused and terse. We'll get this done. Like I need an answer by the end of this meeting. I don't not 5 meetings from now. Like, no consensus now.
Yeah.
Like we are not, drop everything. Like I don't care what else you're working on.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even want to know what it is. Let's get this done. Like this is important. That makes no sense at all when you're in peace. When there really isn't a major catastrophe right around the edge, like your customers are not freaking out. The competitors are not actually innovating ahead of you. You're way ahead of them. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't push, but I am saying when a wartime CE walks in that kind of environment, people kind of go, "Whoa, what is with
slow
this
down, partner?"
Like we're still working on like last year's, look back or whatever. We're doing something kind of random, but the other way around, and it's probably because I work in security, so everything's sort of an emergency always anyway. So that
there does seem to be that.
So that's probably why I prefer that. But the opposite is also weirdly off-putting. So a peacetime CEO in wartime is horrible.
Yeah.
Absolutely horrible. It's like, okay, well, what are you all working on? It's like, well, there's a fire right now. What are you talking about? Like, what are we working on? Like, I'm the only person in the room who actually is working on this thing. We need to all rally now on this thing. But in peacetime, they make tons of sense. They're like, okay, we're working on this thing together.
Sure.
Let's brainstorm some good ideas. Like who's working on some cool stuff or whatever.
I mean, I love that. I mean, the like from our perspective, I've had leaders that were not combat leaders, and it was evident. And then I've had leaders that were, man, those are the guys that I would go to hell with. And the difference between them is not always the hard charging, we must get everything done attitude, but it's the selflessness that they show towards the mission, towards the whatever the goal is, right? And there's a saying, I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So if I had to pick my choice between those two types, I would pick the wartime CEO. And the reason why I'd pick the wartime CEO is that the wartime CEO didn't metamorphosize himself into the wartime condition. He started off in the peacetime condition and learned what it was like to be a wartime CEO. So his capacity to be able, theoretically, his capacity to be able to dial down to peacetime mode, but with the flip of a switch, immediately engage that wartime mindset is what I'm looking for in a leader. When I had this conversation with another teammate of mine, and we were both just foaming at the mouth. We were like, yeah, that's exactly what I want. I want somebody like that. That's who we need. We need that, blah, blah. We just started like this is the type of environment that we excel at. This is the type of environment that we were made for. And, a lot of it has to do with that leadership. Many of us will just follow those types of leaders no matter where they're going. I mean, I freaking opened up a FedEx envelope with a plane ticket. I got a phone call. It said, hey, I can't tell you what you're going to be doing. I can't tell you where you're going to be going, but you're going to get a plane ticket and a FedEx envelope. You're going to want to be on that plane. And I was like, well, what am I doing? Can't tell you that. Can't tell you until you get here. And I asked, okay, who's going to be there? And he rattled off a few names, and that's all I needed. Those guys were the leaders that I trust. And I knew that if we were going into some crazy shit, that's who I want to be at the helm. And I'm not saying that a peacetime CEO who hasn't really kind of cut his teeth in a wartime setting couldn't do a good job there. I'm sure that if they're able and agile, maybe they will. But it's hard on everybody else because you're learning as you go. And that can have some detrimental effects. So if I had my druthers, I would always choose the CEO because in my experience, those wartime leaders can easily transition to peacetime leaders and vice versa. But I don't think that a peacetime CEO that's not comfortable in a wartime setting can do that.
Yeah, I've had a couple of experiences with peacetime leaders, not CEOs, that they'll do kind of weird things. They're like, well, we're having a offsite. And so everybody's going to this thing and we're all going to take the day and we're going to go to this thing. It's this big team building thing. I'm like, we're on fire right this second. Like literally, I need to go put this fire out right now. And
but we have this team building thing.
I'm like,
I have an idea.
We won't have a team.
How about if we do team building right here? How about if we do this project? How about if we put this fire out as a team? That's an idea.
And, just like silly things like, oh, well, have you filled out this employment engagement thing? I'm like, I am literally dealing with this right now. Do you want me to stop doing this to do that? Because I can stop doing this. And it's very hard to put it in their head.
Well, I would say this. Okay. The hard part about that is that if I were in your shoes and that was the situation right then and there, it would be my obligation to pull that guy aside and say, hey, we're not doing that. We're not doing that because of this. We're not doing that because if this doesn't get done, we are in jeopardy. And be able to actually articulate that to him. Because, sometimes they're up in this perch and they don't really see. That's the problem with a lot of that top-down leadership is that they don't have a real good understanding of what's happening at the ground level. I'm not saying everyone, but it seems to me that a decision like that means that you're not in touch. You're not in touch with what's really happening in real time. Or you don't have the capacity to actually pull your middle managers in and say, what's going on? Where do you need help? What can I do? My office exists to help you. What do you need to make that happen? And you're like, well, you know what? That fucking retreat is bullshit. I need all hands on deck. We need, I need a good 72 hours of fucking just nose to the grindstone, and we'll get through this. And if he's worth his salt, he'll say, you got it. And he'll divert all the resources and put them at your disposal. And that's the key. That's what makes it work, is because that's what that leadership, that's what that position means. That position means that you are constantly floating around all the moving parts of your operation, and you're asking what's going on. Like when my OIC would come out to our boxes, and we're doing inventory, we're doing maintenance, we're doing something. And he'd come out and he goes, you guys doing okay? He wasn't asking about me.
Right.
How am I doing? Oh, shit, I could use a coffee, No, he's asking about the department. Is the department good to go? If we got called to go tomorrow, are we ready to go? And more than one time I would say, boss, we could use some more magazines. We could use some more whatever, our nods are getting a little old. We could probably use a refurbish on these things. And he would turn around, walk into the office and make that shit happen. And I had some O's. They were ruthless. They were fearless when it came to fighting for their guys. I had this one. I got to tell this story. It's sad because he's no longer with us. He passed away this year.
Sorry.
Yeah. But he was a great guy. I fucking love that guy. And he was another guy that I would go to hell with. We were supposed to be going on this trip, and this trip, he wanted all the guys to have fresh flight gloves. Like, flight gloves are a very thin material. They're very, they're a consumable item that we go through them. Like, I'll go through them in one 30-day shooting class, I'll go through like 3 or 4 pairs.
Wow.
Yeah. Just because they do good work, but they don't last long. So he wanted us to have a fresh set of flight gloves for the whole platoon. And he tasked me with going back to the supply and getting them. So I married my ass back there and I'm like, hey, Suppo, we need this. And I got the sizes, I got, everything. And he looked at me, he's like, no, you guys don't need those. And I'm like, yeah, we kind of do. We're going on this thing. We need them for this, blah, blah, blah. He's like, no. I'm like, okay. I'm like, he's an officer and I'm an enlisted guy. I wanted to tell him, dude, you exist for me. Mm-hmm. If I ask you for something, you just say, okay, and give it to me. But he didn't. And I didn't say anything. And I went back to the platoon hut and I'm like, boss, he said no. He's like, what? I'm like, yeah, he said no. You go back out there and you tell him. And I'm like, are you sure that's the right thing to do? You're right. He calls him on the phone. I'm sending my guy back there. You will give him this shit. And he hangs up the phone. And I am like, all right, okay. So I marry my ass out there. So I was like, you tell your boss, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Seriously. At this point, I'm like, you're just such a tool. Well, I go back to the platoon hut and it was like, I was afraid to walk in there. I was like, oh, dude.
You're going to get chewed out.
No, I'm not.
Oh, really?
No, fuck. I mean, I can't do anything. I mean, I could,
you
obviously forcefully take the shit and I'm going to be in trouble for that. So I went in there and I'm like, he said no. And he's like, he didn't say a word. He got up and he walked over to the XO's office. And he told the XO, and our XO later, he turned out, not that he wasn't good at that point, but he just went on to be one of the most amazing admirals that we had in the community. He was an XO at the time. And I remember I was on the quarterdeck, which is about, it's like, in your space right here, it's like up near the kitchen. Okay. And he had the quarterdeck page, the Suppo, and that basically means get your ass to my office now. And I'm over there, kind of like he walks by me on the quarterdeck. I'm like, I'm like, don't make eye contact. And he walks into the XO's office with my O there, and the door was closed, and I could fucking hear I could hear the lightning that boy was going through at that moment. Uh-huh. It was very clear. Uh-huh. So he walks out. And you could tell that he was a defeated man. Just fucking, he got put in his place. He goes out and my O just kind of looks at me and he kind of does this. So I follow him out to the supply. He goes in there and he wasn't, he has minions there, right? No, he had to go into the cage and get exactly what I wanted. And I looked at everything. And we're good, and then I left. Well, what I didn't, so later that weekend we were leaving. And so he, as part of his punishment or his education, he had weekend duty. So that meant that he had to stay at the command over the weekend and whatnot. And so I'm walking in I'm like early there because I've got to go. I was the ordnance rep, so I had to go make sure that the guns were all boxed up and ready to go before the platoon got there. And I walk into the quarterdeck, and the moment I walk in there, I can smell it. I know that smell. I know that's, I hate to say it, it's so cliche, but I know that fucking smell. And now I'm looking around like, the fuck just happened here? It's an armed quarterdeck, for obvious reasons. And so I'm walking by our hallway to go down to the ordnance, and we have what's called a command structure board. It's like, like your leadership board. It starts with the president, comes all the way down to the team level. And it's on a wooden, it's kind of like it's a very maritime tradition to have it inlaid and looking really nice, and it's on wood, and it just has a really nice appeal. At least ours looked really nice.
Like behind glass kind of thing?
No, it's just it's got a wooden backdrop, and then the pictures are hung on there and whatnot, and there's a nameplate for their position and whatnot. And as I'm walking by, I noticed something out of place. The XO's picture is not there, but I just knew something was wrong, and I stopped. And I looked, and I still couldn't pick it up. I still couldn't put my finger on what was wrong. And I just went back into the armory, and the XO was also one of those guys that just worked nonstop. So he came in after me, but I could hear him fucking yelling from the ordnance, which is like by your front yard, like where my truck is parked. And I could hear it all the way back there. And I was like, oh shit, something's going down. And I started to move my way up to the quarterdeck, and I could see I did not want to be anywhere near that. I'm like, holy shit. So what ended up happening is that the suppo had been given weekend watch, and he was pissed off about it. And so he was practicing his quick draw against the backdrop of the XO's picture.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. And back then we still run the 226s. And, he would trigger prep the double action, and he trigger prepped it a little bit too much and let loose a round. And the round went right through the XO's picture. And the reason why the picture wasn't there was because he had cleaned it up, and he was in the process of trying to replace it. It was the weekend, so he thought he had...
Might have enough time.
Yeah, exactly. So the XO also knew that smell. And what I didn't notice was that there was a little bitty bullet hole behind it was the wood. He'd already kind of like flattened the wood out and had kind of like cleaned it up a little bit. And now he was just in the process of trying to get a new picture, a new glass, it's a glass picture, right? Sure. The pictures are behind glass, but not the actual decoration. And the XO fucking lost it. He made that guy go out to the dumpster where he had thrown that picture frame and picture away. He made him crawl into that dumpster and find the picture and bring it back to him. And while he was doing that, the XO was on the phone. That guy packed his shit, and by the end of the day, he was in like fucking Alaska. I mean, the end of the day, he was gone. So,
wow. Yeah,
that was, and I was there for it. And you want to talk about like watching, like walking in on your parents arguing? That's what it felt like. I was like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be anywhere near here. I would like to be someplace else right now. It was hilarious. And so the XO actually kept that picture. He framed it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
He had a sense of humor about it.
Oh, well, after the fact.
Yeah, sure.
After the fact, he did. Yeah, after the fact. At that time, oh my God, I was in fear for that guy's life.
Still a good story.
Oh, fuck yeah, man. But I'm serious. I'm surprised he did not fucking beat the shit out of that guy.
Mm-hmm.
God, anyhow, funny story.
Is that time he dodged a bullet, right?
Literally. And apparently the bullet went like right through the chest of the XO's picture. Yeah, so it was like, didn't even, like it was right there. Like of all the times to have the perfect trigger press, that was not it. Woo, fuck. Oh, God. Moving on.
That's a pretty good story. Yeah, so back to business.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's go.
So I think very similar to with a handgun, you have a certain amount of rounds in the chamber,
sure,
right? And recently I've been talking with a lot of venture capitalists and like how they make their investments and how they think about their companies or whatever. And one of the things I heard that I thought was most interesting out of all the things I heard was, I forget which company it is now. One of the big ones, like Sequoia or one of those guys, one of the biggest. They said that they look for, if you do 6 experiments or more per week. Basically, you just try something.
Sure.
Make some thesis, attempt to break that thesis.
Yep.
And if you find out you're right, great. If not, then pivot. And if you keep doing that over week after week after week after week.
Dude, you dial it in.
Right. You got 300 plus different tests in a year. And you just get insanely good. And then we actually almost don't care how bad you were to start because by the end of that 1 year, like you'll have figured out all those problems.
Dude, I cannot tell you how important creativity is. Creativity is like, we have a lot of really crazy problems that we have to solve, and we can, there's obviously a maybe a standard as far as how you deal with certain things, like whatever. But I'll tell you the first time, so it's another funny story. We were down in our dive training area, which is down south, and we were down there for like 3-4 weeks just doing combat swimmer op training and stuff like that. And it usually culminates with like the last couple of days of doing full mission profiles, what we call FTX. And these FTXs are designed to mimic as close as possible real world scenarios that we can practice and stuff like that. And, you know, after about your third or fourth, maybe fifth platoon, you're like, okay, this one again, you know, all right. Yeah, I know, you kind of, I'm not saying it's boring, but one of the most dangerous weapons in the world is a board frogman. So my swim buddy and I, and to do a dive plan. So your dive plan that you do is a very elaborate, because we're underwater navigating. So it's not like you can see landmarks. And there's all these formulas that we use to kind of help figure out, you know, our error boxes and how we're going to bounce back from that and stuff like that. And so not only did we actually do a full-on dive plan and brief our dive plan, but my dive buddy and I had our other plan that we were going to do. And basically it was to not do the dive. But we had to do it like, I mean, we had to really think it through. I mean, we created like all these types of contingencies for our non-dive plan, you know? So we would go on bag, we'd get our last check, we'd dive in the water. We had an exfil point where we would exfil, and one of us went and we repossessed the vehicle. And then the other one grabbed all the gear and met at a different location, and we hauled the gear. We knew how much time the dive was going to take. We knew how much time it would take. And so what we did was we we're at, you know, we also know where, you know, support personnel are going to be, you know, for dive emergency in the water. We know where they're going to be at. We know, you know, we had this elaborate plan about how we were going to do this. And we literally got...
Wait, why?
Well, that's what I'm saying. The board frogman. It's the board.
You're just like, let's try to do something it's impossible.
It wasn't impossible.
But it feels like a mission impossible. I'm telling you, man, we were like, at first I was like, oh man, if we get caught, it's like, well, we shouldn't get caught then. Don't get caught.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so we went through this elaborate dive plan, and we then did our non-dive plan. And I remember, we even I think we rolled through like on base, there was like a drive-through, like a McDonald's drive-through. We went through and got like McDonald's, and we ate and we waited because we had to wait. We couldn't show up. So we had to time it to where as the dive pairs come in, we're like in the middle, right? So we're not first and we're not last, right? So we're sitting there, we're eating, you know, in the parking lot of McDonald's, and then, you know, we're keeping track of time, and we're like, okay, yeah, we know when we need to start heading back to, and we had to also figure out a way to purge the oxygen that we were carrying so that we didn't come back with full tanks.
Right.
So we had to, all of this was planned. All of this was planned. And we had to also figure out how to return the vehicle and make sure it was cleaned out, because we're soaking wet, we're covered in sand. So we had to make sure all of that got taken care of. We had this, I mean, it was such an elaborate plan. It was perfect. It was awesome. And we went and we executed that plan perfectly. I mean, perfectly. And we were like, we got to tell somebody. We can't just not say this. We just like executed the perfect plan. It was the perfect op. And we were like, no, we can't tell anybody. But we got to. We can't not let. So we told somebody in our platoon. And so like the next night,
you were bored.
Yeah. So the next night they wanted to do the same thing. And we're like, ooh, shit, I don't know, man. You know, we just were like, we got lucky. Let's not run it. Let's not risk it. But we knew that they probably didn't have the real skills to get this. I mean, because both of us were super crafty and super cunning. And I'm not saying those guys weren't, but I just don't think they had what it take to actually make that work. And so we're like, all right. So we did it again. Only this time we had this dive pair with us. Mm-hmm. We did that for like 3 nights.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we finally got caught.
How?
We had too many people. There was just like the tracks were too difficult to cover. The logistics were starting to get strung out. And eventually it was It was one of my favorite chiefs. I love this man to death. He is another godsend. And he had a real thick drawl, southern drawl. And he looked at the group and he looked at us. He's like, I know you two are the ones that did this. And now you're going to tell me how. And we were just, and the chief told those other guys, you're dismissed. And we were like, fuck. So we laid it all out. We laid it, the perfect op. We laid it all out because the other two ops didn't go as smooth. They really didn't. And it was interesting to see that. And we on the whiteboard, we laid it all out. Like we put everything together. We're like, here's our dive plan, but here's how we executed this. Here's where we knew we had to be at this location to get visual sighting from the support personnel. And this is how we knew we would approach the exfil point and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, you shouldn't have done it, but I'm glad you did it. And we were like, what? He's like, yeah. Two reasons. Number one, it was very audacious of you guys to do that. And that shows that, you're willing to do what it takes to make things happen. You're also creative enough to actually do that. You're also stupid enough to not know when to call it quits. And rather than keep doing it with the other guys, you didn't know when to call it quits. And we were like, yeah. And so we were just waiting. Oh, like we were going to get shafted. We're going to have, I don't know, like fucking car wash. We're going to have to like wax the school buses in the parking lot of the, the on-base school or some shit like that. And he was like, no, there's nothing. Just don't do it again. And I was like, wow, okay. And, like years later, I remember talking to him. I was like, you remember that time? He's like, yeah, I remember. And I was like, what, like,
what was going through his head?
Yeah. And he's like, you guys just demonstrated to me who I can really count on to solve a problem in real time and to be able to actually make it happen. Like you fuckers would actually probably be able to pull some shit off in real time that nobody else could.
And extremely complicated things.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, and it's always about, you have a plan. That plan very rarely survives contact with the enemy. You've got to be able to pivot, adapt, and overcome. And being stuck in a mindset that does not allow for free thinking and thinking outside the box and solving problems. I mean, you got nothing. You're just a pawn at that point. We don't want pawns. We want strategic players on the board that can actually execute moves and actually dominate that field. And that's what, again, makes special operations so unique in that sense. A funny story, again, about that same chief. It was years later, and he's now in charge of he was my platoon chief, but years later, he's now in charge of the actual combat swimmer program. And we're back in that same training area. And my dive buddy and I, when we got inserted, we did a helo cast, and when I hit the drink, somehow or another I lost one of my fins, couldn't get it, and so I did that whole dive plan. We were the very last ones to come in. I did that whole dive plan with one fin, and I remember. Did
you swap them occasionally, or
just, no? So what we ended up doing was. This was, ad hoc. It wasn't like we had an elaborate plan. And so what my dive buddy and I, different dive buddy, we cheated. We did terrain navigation in the water so that I could actually kind of like kick off the ground a little bit. And it put us in dangerous, obviously we wouldn't do that in enemy territory, but at one point we're like, fuck it. We're never going to make our time hack. We've got to, get out and start fucking beating feet on the ground, on land. And, we were on this kind of like desert cove area that had a drivable section that was just past like the end of the beach, what we call the hinterland, the beginning of the hinterland. And as we're like running through the jungle, literally, he drives up behind us, and I'm just like, oh, we're so fucked. And he's like, what are you doing? And I knew I like I got lucky the first time, so I didn't want it. Like I was not willing. I knew, okay, I'm getting from both barrels. Right. This time there's no escape for me. And he's like, let me get this straight. You thought you could finish this dive with one fin. I'm like, yeah. And you thought that it was worth risking the completion of this mission to try to do it with one fin. I'm like, yeah. Did you stop to think about maybe making contact with the support who has spare gear and they can actually give you a spare fin to finish the op with? No. Even though it's part of our brief. No. And then I was like, motherfucker, he's going to make us get back in the water and finish the dive. And actually what he did was, he's like, I'm actually impressed that you got this far. Get in the back of the truck. And he took us to a launch point and he's like, don't say this. Don't tell anybody this. And so I'm telling everybody now. But my swim buddy and I, we got in the water. We swam around the cove. He's like, but you get in the water. I don't want to see you near shore. Because he actually said he saw us. He saw us from afar. That's how he knew to come down the road.
Gotcha.
Like little figures in the horizon, kind of the skyline there. But, we did. And I'll tell you what, man, it was like, man, I don't know. We had like about 1,500 meters left. And, oh, my God, that was punishment enough. Just that little, because some of our dives can be like 4,000 meters. And we had to go around this cove, this point to go into the harbor and swim and hit a ship. And then he told us to get out of the water after that. Oh, it was miserable. That sucked. I had one Arnold leg after that. And I did switch sides after a while. I would put the fin on the other side, but it was, and we swim buddy, we switched off every now and then. It just, I couldn't put that responsibility on him. So after like one time I was like, nope, not doing it. I'll just suck it up, do it myself.
Seems like you could also kind of buddy swim a little bit,
but you can't do that very far, very long, because the rhythmic motion is not in sync. You only have one fin. You're not able to do the same. We tried that. It didn't work. Yeah. We tried a lot.
I bet.
We tried a lot of things. Yeah. It sucked. It was frustrating. I'll never forget that. And my lesson learned was, not to lose my fins.
Yes.
Not to lose my fins.
That's right.
That was a big lesson learned.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things you punish yourself to never, ever, ever do it again, right?
Well, you try to, The good thing about the training environments is that they teach you a lot. They really do. And and like I was saying, you're not learning how to do things perfectly. You're learning how to do things to accomplish the task. And, you can accomplish that task at 100%, or you can accomplish that task at 80%. And the difference between the two can be very strategic, very, very strategic. At 80%, I'm able to continue to do something else at 80% versus, having expended everything at that 100% level. Not like you could really ever do 100%, but there's so much value I took from that. And the ability, here's what I always was so enamored with, was the ability to make the right split-second decision in real time. And a lot of that was a result of all the failures in training, all the experiences that you had that allowed you to formulate this matrix of sorts, that allowed you to kind of quickly make that yes, no, right, wrong kind of decision. And, a lot of times it was just like that. Yes, no, black, white. It was not always, but a lot of times it was just like that.
So pivoting a little bit.
Okie dokie.
One of the things you said, I think in the first class I ever took with you, was in your last encounter, did you win or did the adversary lose?
Yeah.
I think about that a lot because in that particular day the reason why I was in there, I was definitely just very lucky.
Sure.
Very lucky because that guy was not a real adversary. He wasn't armed. He wasn't actually trying to hurt me. He was just an idiot. But that's just how bad I was, is I was even in that situation in the first place.
Yeah.
In the business world, I think about this a lot too, though, because when you're like, yeah, we made this sale against our competitor, like everyone's, patting themselves in the back and, like, yeah, we won the deal. It's like, did you really win it or did they lose it?
It's a great, great point. And here's the thing that goes with that. Having the humility to know the difference. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is one of the things that I learned also early in my career is that humility. You know, it's really hard to kind of put that into terms, right? But the difference between, like, I never wanted to win because that other guy lost. I wanted to win because I was better and that I deserved to win. And it drove me to do things to the 9th degree. You know, I mean, in some cases, probably not from, you know, not in my best interest at times, but it really did. It really drove me hard. But the thing that I want people to realize is that, you know, that's a very hard pill to swallow, because we want to always assume that we were the better. We were the one that won because we were better. And, you know, look at pro sports and how many games are lost because the other team made more mistakes. And it wasn't that you were better than them. You just made less mistakes. Mm-hmm. And that's the key thing that I think is more important, is that for us, we know we're going to make mistakes. The key is to make fewer catastrophic mistakes than the bad guy. And that's how we, at times, can pull a win from a really bad situation.
Something my dad used to tell me, it was meant to be, I think, kind of a joke, but not exactly. It's like, I'd rather be lucky than good.
Yeah.
Because you can be the best in the world and unlucky, and it doesn't matter.
It's true.
And it's sort of a joke.
I get it. It's a good one.
It's a good joke.
Yeah.
But it also makes me think, like, but I think there's the opposite of that.
I am always the opposite. I'd rather be good than lucky. I can control good. I can't control luck. Mm-hmm. I will take luck. I'll take it all day long. But that, to me, represents somebody that's not willing to put the work in and just rely on luck.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I don't welcome luck. I don't want that message to be misunderstood. I'm just, in my experience, you know, fortune favors the bold.
I think it was his subtle way of telling me, you don't have to try 1,000%.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, really, luck will contribute a huge amount to whether you succeed
I agree.
or not.
I 100% agree with that. And this was also something that was explained to me when that luck that we're talking about, a lot of times falls in the lap of those that are better prepared.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's the key. So that's what I would tell people, is like, you've put yourself in a position where you expose yourself to more luck when you're that good, when you're at that level, when you're good, not that good, but when you're just good, when you put the work in. You put the work in. And again, we have lost so many teammates and other service members and Americans because they were just unlucky. I mean, that's just how simple it is. And that sucks. That really, really sucks. But when you're in the business world, you know, how can you objectively claim that you're successful when all you do is rely on the other people to lose? When you don't actually bring to the table that formula for success, that you just rely on, let's just go get the scraps from everybody else around us that are losing, that are not winning, that can't win, whatever the case might be. I mean, that does not seem to me to be a good business model.
Right. I think it also, if you talk about individual employees, I think it's a very similar situation. Like, yeah, you can just 9 to 5 and appear at the job, and you can just get by. And there's a lot of people who do that.
Yep.
But there's somebody out there who's grinding.
Oh, yeah.
And they're working and hungry.
Man, I'll tell you right now, in this environment where we're at right now, both my kids are kind of at that in their 20s, their young 20s. And I tell them every day, I'm like, listen, all you have to do is you have to out hustle everybody else around you, and you will be at the top of your game before you know it. Yep. And the reason, and what I tell them, like, and I define that, I was like, here's what you need to do. And it's just everything that I was told as a new guy. Everything I was told as a new guy, that's what you need to be doing right now. If you do that, I guarantee, because right now in today's work climate, it's much easier to keep an employee than to rehire and retrain a new employee. Mm-hmm. And that's that's to be said about it. Almost any kind of condition, it's much easier. It's more efficient to work with with what you have available. But when you distinguish yourself in that way, you open up so many other opportunities, because there are plenty of people that are just there to punch that ticket, and they can get by not doing anything all day long. And you're willing to do the work that maybe not their work, but you're willing to do your work, and you're willing to do it in a manner that is, it supports the actual mission of that company, whatever it is, selling widgets or fixing widgets or making widgets, whatever it is, you're focused on making, bringing that outcome to a good, improving the outcome basically. Mm-hmm. And the other day, my oldest came to me and he's like, you're never going to believe this. And I was like, what? He's like, well, we got pulled aside and I had this compliment paid to me. And I was like, really? He's like, what was it? He's like, the guy really was sharing with upper management his experience with me this is one of the newer middle managers, and he was sharing his experience in the few weeks that he's had on the job with my son, as well as some other guys. And he brought, to their attention some of the things that my son did. And it was a moment for me to just sit quietly and just, so sounds like everything I told you is paying off. I had to wait. I had to let him get it all out, and then I could just say, aha. But and I tried not to, but he already knew it. He was like, because at that point, that's when he had the buy-in. He had, on the one hand, he sees me, he knows of my success. He sees how I succeed in my current state, and he understands that to a certain extent. But he had a hard time buying into it in his world. And I kept preaching it. I kept saying the same things over and over and over again to him. And, lo and behold, he was actually doing them, and he did them, and it caught their attention. And he comes back and he's like, and I was like, you see, and that right there is that first kick, that first, sense of accomplishment that you just received, that's going to lead to the next kick. And then that's going to lead to the next kick. And before you know it, you're not competing against anybody in that job, in that workplace, in that business, in that, whatever that environment is. You're not competing against everybody. You're at the top. You're at the top because you're proven. You are somebody that can be relied on to get the job done. And in today's world,
yeah, especially now.
Yeah, especially at that level.
So I feel like there's two things we're talking about here that kind of need to be distinguished. One is working on the job and actually excelling at the job and really not taking 12 coffee breaks and
sure.
Actually putting in the work in and focusing on what's best for the company, making your manager look good, all the things that kind of the basics, I think, of the job. But it's just the second part, which I think is actually weirdly more important.
Okay.
It's all the stuff you do after work.
Interesting.
It's like reading the book on business. Like going to that meetup. It's like making sure that you've, studied up on this newest whatever widget the competitors are doing or whatever. It's all the off-hour stuff.
I agree with you. And I feel like it's a balancing act. One of the things that he did was he started to, he struggled in school because he has a different way of learning. And once now that he's kind of started to figure out how to really exploit how he learns, he's started to figure things out. He does really amazing work at times. And, I'll catch him watching YouTube videos on...
About you, obviously.
No, God, no. No, YouTube videos about his trade or about things that he wants to do outside of his trade that are kind of associated with his trade, like the next step, the next level. He's already looking at upper, like where's the next step? Because one of the things that I'm very happy about is I've talked to him about the importance of upward mobility, being able to ascend in the hierarchy there to a position to the next position and to just keep going from there. He's actually started to appreciate the importance behind that. And he recognizes that it's not just everything that he does on the job, but what does he bring to the job? And, they hire for certain things. And if you can distinguish yourself as a person or an employee that has other things to bring to the table, in this case, he's kind of studied the landscape. He recognizes that these widgets are commonly, they're doing a lot of work on these widgets. So he started studying on those widgets, and he's not mastered those widgets yet, but he understands them a little bit more. And they brought in somebody that is an expert on those widgets, and now he's able to kind of soak up all that information and take that information and ask for, hey, I will learn whatever you teach me. If you want to teach me how this widget works, I will learn how that widget works, and I will be able to fix that widget for you instead of you fixing that widget. And, he started to figure that out. And I've seen him kind of get that kind of point of pride about his professionalism and really what it means to be an actual tradesman. And have, the capacity to actually improve that. So I feel like, what you do on the job is only part of it, right? And it's who's willing to put in the extra work. And in this case, it's what you do off the job.
And oftentimes I've found that the extra stuff you do, the stuff that it's sort of only kind of tangentially related, maybe.
Sure.
That's the part where you're in a meeting and and someone starts asking you a question. And you're
Yep.
like, but what about this other thing these competitors are doing? Like, whoa, what? I've never heard of that. And suddenly you're not just the most important person in the room. You might be the most important person in the company.
At that point, absolutely.
Like everyone's like, whoa, how'd you find that out? You're like, oh, I was doing some research last night and blah, blah, blah. Like,
it's so true.
You know what I mean?
Sometimes it's just that little stuff. It's those little things that I think distinguish you and like, we you referenced the term the grind, and we use the term hustle. That's the term that we use. It's the hustle. You're always in there to hustle. You're hustling. And it's not a derogatory mean like I'm trying to steal from you. It's, it's hustle from like a sports and athletic endeavor. You're always trying to move. You're always trying to get to the next step, the next level, the next whatever. You're always hustling. You're never just kind of like walking off the playing field. You hustle off the playing field.
Well, there's good reason for that.
Yeah.
If you get them off the field faster, you have more time to talk.
Yeah, exactly. There's that too. So, there's and so, once I try to help him to understand the importance behind hustling at work, he starts to figure it out because like he heard that in all him and his brother heard that a lot.
I bet.
Oh, like literally the term hustle up, let's go. And I could still see him. They both played.
I can't imagine being your kid. I cannot.
They both like I actually was. One of my greatest and fondest memories as a father was coaching them both at the same time on the lacrosse team. I went out and got certified as a lacrosse coach, and I coached them both. They happened to have an overlap in their age group, and it was this. One of the most blessed things that I can think about. But yeah, there was I remember I would yell at them, "Hustle, let's go," and they would just immediately start walking. Everybody else is hustling, but those two knuckleheads, and I'm like, all right. Okay. Yep. All right. Of course, there's that pushback, that rebellious streak. I wonder where they got that from.
Yeah, no kidding. But I think there's there's another part of that though. It's sticking up for yourself. You know what I mean? Because when you're in a work environment,
yes,
no one's going to look after you. You don't have anybody who really cares about you. I mean, maybe if you're really lucky, your manager wants to promote you or something. Every once in a while, you'll find someone who's a really good manager, but most of the time, no one's looking out for you. They don't care about you.
God, that's so sad for me to hear you say that.
It's just true.
But it's so sad. I mean, I can see it maybe, but I just think back to and even now, I have guys. Earlier today, I was at the range and a teammate, and we hadn't seen each other in a while. And I'm on the range. He walks in there. We both sit down, pull up some stools. We both sit down. We just check in with each other. We're just talking, how are you doing? What's going on with you? I mean, that's how we were forged. It's how we were made, is to look out for one another, to check in. And
that's a good manager.
Well, it is.
But they're just not that
I
common.
know, but that's why I'm saying it's sad. It's sad. It's sad to see that because I get it. Sometimes you don't want to help other people excel and look better than you. And you don't want to lose your job or lose your promotion or lose your pay grade, your increase in salary. You don't want to compromise that, so you don't help other people. You don't help them. And it's frustrating to see that, because you wonder why we're struggling as a country. You're wondering why we're struggling to be back at the top again. You're wondering why. Well,
no sense of community whatsoever.
I don't even call it that. It's just a selflessness. And I'll tell you, man, I did not understand it until I saw it in real time. The selflessness and how that really works. And man, I'll tell you,
it's a blessed thing.
It is. It is. And it was.
But it must be a bit of a culture shock coming back from it, because
it was. I'll tell you, man, I had a hard time adjusting to life in the real world. I mean, it really was. I had to be my own chief. I had to be my own I had to be my own, admiral to make sure that we were moving in the right direction and doing the right things. And I fucked all those up, and I made terrible mistakes as a result. I mean, I learned from them, and I'm successful as a result of that. But man, it was not easy. And I, nowadays I feel for the guys. It's even harder. I mean, they have a lot of options. Like, I love the fact that right now there's a program that our guys can roll right into as soon as they leave the Navy, into an MBA program that they walk out of that, out of 2 years, they walk out with an MBA that puts them in a real, not only do they have their special operations experience, but they now have what is considered to be a requirement these days to actually get into that door, to find themselves in a good job in a good company. And I think that's great that they're doing that. I think, I'm hopeful that, our culture merges with their culture, and they see the importance and the value, and they,
I don't see that happening, Jeff.
I hope that we're wrong. I kind of agree with you, but I do see it. You see it in some companies.
Occasionally. You
see it in some successful companies, how they are selfless in that sense, and how they work together, and how they understand, man.
I take it back. Every once in a while, you run into a guy like Marty Cagan, who will take lessons from Lynn, Reedy, who's the real person who I think he learned the most from, this senior vice president at eBay. And he goes on the roadshow and tells all these companies how Lynn Reedy worked within these companies. And she was terrifying. I worked underneath her. Terrifying. Real wartime CEO type, except she wasn't the CEO. She had some kind of lame title. But she's the real person who ran eBay, like for reals.
Wow.
Like everybody else, just get out of her way. She didn't even have an office. She had a conference room because she was in meetings 100% of the day.
Oh my God.
Like insane, crazy work. It's hard to describe exactly.
Sure.
Actually, let me spend like 1 minute describing this.
Please
woman.
do.
She's absolutely fascinating. So she's the only person in eBay's history of all the employees. Like, everyone gets feedback scores. It's kind of like Flair at Chili's restaurant or something.
Yeah.
You got to have a certain amount or whatever. It's just garbage, and I hate it, and I think it's stupid. So I have like 15 feedback score or something, which everyone's like scoffs at, because I just don't care, right? I'm out fixing fires or whatever.
Yeah.
So I thought I was very bad. Like, I'm about as bad as you could possibly be.
Sure.
They give you money to go spend on eBay so you'll have a good feedback score. That's how much they want you to use eBay. And
I got you.
Anyway, she had a negative feedback score because she had never once used eBay.
I love this person. Keep talking about her, man. I love her.
So she had a negative feedback score because the only one time she'd ever logged into eBay was to make sure that someone had done their job, and she needed to test one feature. And then she ended up buying something by accident, and she's like, crap. And so she never
delete.
She never ended up buying the thing. So she had a negative feedback score. She had this old, absolutely beat up like Porsche. You're like, oh, it's a Porsche. No, not what you're thinking. Like, absolute piece of crap. Like, like literally duct taped together.
Oh my goodness. That's hilarious.
But she didn't care, right? It's like, why do I care about the car? It just gets me to and from work.
Yeah.
The first time I walked into her office, I was absolutely convinced she was going to fire me.
Oh, wow.
100% convinced, because I was killing one of her things, one of her initiatives. And she almost did. And she'd fire people all the time for not doing their job. Like, you suck, get out.
Yeah.
Like, I will help you get better if I think you're worth it. But,
for sure.
But you clearly don't show the aptitude. And this place is a high performing, like, it's sort of, think of it like buds, right?
Yeah.
You're out. You're just not good enough. But like, if you got past that point and you're like actually a trusted member of her staff, then it's like, okay, you seem to know what you're talking about. So you get brought in on these types of issues.
Interesting.
And we got it was like a tight, very highly, like everybody in the entire product org was all A players, every one of them.
Nice.
You don't make it if you're not an A player.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking around at all these A players, and normally I'm the A player, right? And I'm like, I'm just average of the pack here.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many amazing people are here.
Yeah.
It's like over 100 people who are all, I'd hire any one of them.
Yeah.
Like incredibly talented, very dedicated people. But that all came from her, and she was very strict, but also very careful to understand what you're saying. She would really focus on what you're saying, and like very fact driven. Like, I need to know everything you're saying, and how does that relate to the business? So in that context, I think if you have like a guy like Marty Cagan, who she's not going to self-promote. She doesn't have time for that, she was never like thinking about herself. She was always thinking about the job in front of her.
Yeah.
But a guy like Marty Cagan going around saying, okay, no, and me now apparently, going off and telling like how amazing she was.
Yeah.
And what incredible leader, like really, truly.
Interesting.
Terrifying, but incredible. You knew you were going to get fired if you didn't have the right answer. Like you walk in with the answers.
Yeah.
You don't like, oh, I don't know. Why don't you know?
That's the worst words to use. Absolutely.
It's like, we are working to find the answer is the right answer.
Yes, absolutely.
So anyway, I think if you have somebody like them promoting to enough companies, you might see a groundswell of like, okay, maybe there's a new way of doing business. Like the automobile, the supply chain, what am I thinking of? The assembly line, right?
Oh, okay.
Like a new way to do business.
Yeah.
How Toyota kind of revolutionized robotics. New way to do business. I think there might be a groundswell with something like that, but it would take something like that.
Interesting. That's disappointing.
I agree.
I know that there are several companies that are changing or exploring new approaches, because we see it I see it with some of the guys that I work with. I'm involved with certain organizations where we work with them or consult with them on how to solve their problems. Honestly, my job description was I was a troublemaker / problem solver. Right. I went someplace and I created a whole bunch of fucking trouble, and then I had to solve for that trouble that I made, because sometimes they'd put me in a pickle as well. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I don't know, and maybe this is something that I need to actually take action for on my end, which is following up with them and finding out what have you actually done since the last time I saw you that has positively impacted your production.
I bet if you did, you would have this amazing collection of great stories.
I don't know. I'm curious now because I haven't actually done. I stay in touch with some of them, but it's not necessarily like, hey, let's circle up and debrief me on, like, it's been a year, it's been 2 years, whatever. Debrief me how's what's happened, what worked, what didn't work. And, because the most valuable thing, there's character traits that we look for within the special operations community. There's like 10 very specific and strong character traits that we look for. And not everybody has all 10, but one of them, and one that I find to be so incredibly important, is problem solving skills. Being able to actually solve real fucking problems. And I'm good at it because I make a lot of mistakes. I'm good at it because I put myself in situations where I have to do that. I'm good at it because I've been in a situation where nothing that we thought of worked. And, when I see people that are able to actually do that at a leadership level, like actually can create a culture, an environment where you are a problem solver, You are a problem solver. You are a problem solver. Go. Problem solve. Do it. What do you need to get that done? What do you need to fix this problem? What do you need? Like, now let's start projecting. What's the next future problem that we need to start thinking about? How do we solve that one? How do we promote or project out to the next potential problems that we're going to solve? Now we're starting to think that second order effect. We're starting to actually get into that, the meat of it in a sense, and actually able to project out and anticipate, potentially even predict what's going to happen. And that's what we do. We put pressure, on the battlefield. We put pressure in certain areas because it will predictably result in things happening. That's kind of how
flush the enemy out in a certain direction.
It's fire maneuver psychological effects. It's there's actually studies on it, and we employ them and we use them, and that's kind of how that works. But for me, that was an area that, I excelled at, and I used to think I excelled at it because I made a lot of mistakes. I didn't do things right. Maybe that's what led me to being a good problem solver, was that I had to do it a lot. I have a lot of practice at it. But, I find nowadays, it's like, I'll have somebody come up to me and they're like perplexed. I'm like, why? What is the problem? And how is it that you couldn't figure that out on your own? Why couldn't you solve that problem on your own? Like, my kids will do that to me sometimes, and I'll be like, I'm like, just, and they're like, oh, I could probably, never mind. And they just walk away, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah. And, as an instructor, when we are running our instructor cadre through things, when we are selecting a potential instructor for us, that is one of the most important skills that I hire for, is that I don't care how good of a shot you are. You're here because you are a good shot. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. I don't care what equipment you run. I don't care how many years you have. It doesn't matter to me. You're here because you have demonstrated that you have the potential. But what I'm most curious in is, how are you going to solve the problem that the student presents to you? And we would sit in people hated this, right? But I would give them a problem. As soon as they walked into my office for an interview, I would sit down, I'd give them a problem. I'd walk out of the room, they had 10 minutes to solve the problem. I'd come back, and I cannot tell you how many times people would push back against that. Like, why am I doing this? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do this? And right off the bat, I'd be like, there's the door. You don't have to do it. See ya. Other times I would see guys that would fail miserably at trying to solve that problem. And I'd be like, okay, but you are willing to put the effort in. If I give you the tools and the strategies on how to do this, you'll be able to do this, right? I don't expect you to have this. That's why I'm selective about who we hire. And I've had one guy that took that problem and actually was able to like do this really cool. Like, he actually did better than anybody else has ever done. And he was good at solving problems for students. He really was. He was able to sit there and look and really, take all the information available, not just their shooting, not just the target, but take their equipment, take their experience, and all put that into a formula and factor out potential solutions that would actually work in many cases. That's what I need. I need somebody that can do that. And that's something I identified early on for the success of our company, because if I have a student that comes to our class and they leave with a negative experience, they're not coming back. They're not. Why would they? It was terrible, right? I don't need them to have a positive outcome. Like in your case, I don't need you to pass the class. I need you to have a positive experience enough to be willing to keep coming back. And then as you come back, we eventually together start to work at solving your problems. We realize that, you were your problem. You were getting in your own way. As soon as I got you to, whatever little mnemonic I gave you, you just push past that, and then you started to excel, and you really started to see your potential, your growth potential at that point. You started to see how much you could actually accomplish at that point. That to me is invaluable beyond words. Like, I don't hire, our instructor cadre doesn't get pulled up just because they served in a special operations community. They are there because they are some of the best problem solvers. It just so happens that they happen to be some of the best problem solvers. And that as soon as I can give them the solutions to give, and like, hey, you're able to kind of like see this, here's how you solve that. And they could have possibly figured it out on their own, but I just fast track it. Like, hey, when you recognize this, boom, here's how you do it. And man, it's been really hugely valuable. It's not easy, but it's very valuable to do it that way.
All right, the last one.
Last one? That's
last
it?
One. Well, I'm sure I could come up with more, but
okay.
That's one I had planned to talk about. We talked about it a little bit before, but it was first day I met you. The firefights are clothing optional. It stuck with me. I think it's both funny and extremely useful advice.
Okay.
Extremely useful advice.
Okay.
But it's useful in not just the obvious, an actual firefight in the most literal sense. And in the rest of life, I think that there's kind of two paths you could take. There's the kind of laissez-faire, let it come, life will be what it'll be.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people do relatively well with that. They have a job and a kid and, a dog and just the kind of life happens to them.
Sure.
And then there's the other type, and they fight as if their lives depended on it. And they really are out there. It's kind of back to that grinding thing a little bit.
Yeah.
But in all contexts, in business, they're asking for raises. In contract negotiations, they're getting like that one extra point. They're like always just pushing just a little bit. And not to being a gigantic asshole to everybody. I mean, that won't work, right?
Sure.
In a game theory, you're just going to die.
Yeah.
But they're not leaving stuff on the table that's theirs to take. And they're not sitting idly by while life is happening to them.
Yeah.
They're fighting for their family in the case where they need to fight for them. They're fighting for, a book deal or something. They're fighting for whatever, the next thing, whatever it is. They're always out there.
They're hustling.
But not even just about their job.
Yeah.
It's just like their whole life just gets spun up into how can I just sort of maximize all of the stuff? How can I make my lives for my family better? How do I make my lives for my community better? How do I make lives for my employees better, et cetera, right? Like, how do I just kind of move the whole thing? And that is one of those situations where it's like you may want to do all those things, right? Like say that's your lofty goal, but you are naked in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Now we're talking.
and you might have all the best of intentions and life is just throwing just shit at you.
Yeah.
Right. And so now it's like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to freeze? You're just going to let it. You're just going to hope to God. You just don't get shot or, don't have the bad thing, fully take you out. Or are you just going to say, screw it. I'm going to go into this and totally ill prepared with the wrong equipment at the wrong time. But this is what I've got and I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to succeed with what I've got.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that of all the lessons I've learned over the last year, I know we've known each other longer, but it took me a while to fully internalize that due to some deaths close to me. We both had it, I think. And someday I will have a big conversation about it, but not today. I think that knowing that I was behind the eight ball and there was a lot working against me, and then reading Ryan Holiday's book, finding out that I actually was more capable in that moment and I had more energy. I was actually more energized despite the fact that my situation was shitty.
Interesting.
Than I had predicted it would be. And instead of going backwards and going, wow, I should just feel miserable and, roll up on a couch and cry all day.
Yeah.
I was the exact opposite. I was energized. I was helping people and, helping the family and, the whole, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think for me, there's two things that I think of. Number one is know your worth, right? Know your worth, but also know where that ends. And what can I do to fill that gap? What can I do to fill those gaps? That's something that I've always been I'm very aware of where my blind spots are. Well, I shouldn't say very aware, but I'm aware of the big blind spots. Then it goes back to that selfless service that I find to be, when in doubt, that's my default setting. Like, I have two default settings. One is to help others without question. And then two is default to violence. Like, those are it. So I'm either helping you or I'm hurting you. One of the two. And I obviously do a lot more helping. I find that that's one of the reasons why I enjoy teaching, is because I get to help people. I get to actually get them through some tough, like in your case, some really tough times, like some tough issues that you had to overcome. And the reason why you're standing there it didn't come easily. When I get into those ruts, when I get into those situations where, things are kind of like not going well, or things are, I don't know, maybe the economy is not where it once was, and
COVID.
all this, COVID, all this other shit.
It's hard to do in-class stuff with COVID.
I double down on that selflessness and what can I do for others? And it's not to say I don't take care of myself, but I know that's going to be the right answer 99% of the times, and that 1% is when I choose violence. So when I'm helping others, I feel energized. I feel energetic. I feel valuable. I feel I'm close to my worth at that moment when I'm actually helping other people. And, I've done it in different ways, but now I found an occupation, a profession that I can actually do it and get that kind of like, for me, it's watching a student grow and become in a sense, self-aware of them, of their potential, and know that, okay, I can do this. I can actually do this. And just, a little nudging here and there, a little bit of manipulation here and there, and they're off, and that to me is one of the most rewarding, parts of my job, parts of my career that I can actually have. I've had several students that have called me up after they've been involved in a defensive gun use. Excuse me. And, just listening to them and knowing that something that I did with them helped them in some way, or they're sharing that with me, that is, again, and I don't, believe me, I'm not asking for students to go out there and do that.
I bet every one of those, they were as well prepared as they were, they could have been more prepared.
I think a lot of them,
they just showed up with whatever they had.
Exactly. I think a lot of them solved the problem with what they had. Like, again, it gets back into that problem solving mode. If I can create if I can create in you a desire to solve problems as your kind of like default setting, like that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to solve this problem. What's that problem? I'm going to solve that problem. What's this problem? I'm going to solve that problem. Then you're doing stuff, you're moving in that direction. But if you can add that selflessness to it, like you're helping to solve other people's problems, then that to me is, the best of both worlds. And that's what I enjoy doing. That's why I'm still doing what I'm doing. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I'm still doing what I'm doing. Every now and then I question, like, hey, is it time for me to go ahead and retire and go off and do something else? And then something happens, like, a pandemic, defunding the police, riots. Now we've got all this shit happening throughout the world, throughout the globe. Now I just saw the FBI director come out and say, hey, we're in more danger than we think we are. We have way too many intelligence blind spots. There are some bad things about to happen here. Oof. I'm telling you this so that you can try to do something about it, because we can't help. So, that was how I interpreted his, wow. That's not what he said, but that's how I interpreted it. It's basically like, wiping his sleeves of being able to stop the next terrorist attack, being able to stop the next major event, the
CYA.
Pretty much it gets back to that. Like, I hate to say it, but what I am upset about in our country is from the early stages of our being as a country, one of the most common traits that we had was the resiliency. People in that day and age were extremely resilient. I get it. We're living in a world now that has self-driving cars, and that's one less thing that you have to do. But is that really a good thing? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But what I will tell you is that if you have started to lose your driving skills when you get behind the wheel, I don't want you there. I don't want you behind the wheel if you don't have those driving skills. So I guess, with all the shit that's happening right now, my biggest piece of advice to everybody is, and you're another good example. I hate to keep saying that, but when you first started shooting, the handgun was not the tool that it is now for you. And it's not a talisman that's going to ward off evil. You had to put the work in to actually exploit the capabilities of that tool. And I leave that as a cautionary tale to everybody, that just going out and buying something, whether it's a gun or whether you buy,
or a car
or something off Amazon or whatever, and think that that's going to solve your problems. It's just an inanimate object. It's not. Who's going to solve the problem is you. How are you going to do it? Yeah, you might use that tool, but that's not the end all be all to everything. So if you're going to, especially, a firearm, goes back to what we were saying earlier, take it upon yourself to actually know how to do it, or know how to use it, because if your life or the life of your family depends on it, you don't want that on your conscience after the fact, that you could have done something better, or you didn't put the time in, or you just didn't know. That's not the type of life that you want to live afterwards. The regrets are just not worth it. It's much better to do the work now while you have the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jeff, thank you for doing this part 2. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I enjoyed this. This was a thought-provoking and kind of stirred the juices in my brain cells. So I appreciate that.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much, man.
My pleasure. Thank you.